Merci beaucoup, Annie. Welcome, colleagues, to our Global Changemakers series and our very special session today, which we started out calling a summit, and we talked about a global check-in, and what the important thing, I guess, is that it's a great gathering of people who have an interest in strengths-based nursing and healthcare and leadership. And I'm very, very honored as the CEO of the Canadian Nurses Association to be able to host this meeting today and to welcome you, as I said, from across Canada and from wherever you are in other countries around the world. We're thrilled to have you with us. I'm speaking to you from Eastern Ontario, which is sort of the middle part of Canada, if you don't know Canada very well. And I am speaking from the traditional and unceded ancestral lands of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people who lived here and walked on this land long before settlers did. And I live on an acre of land in farm country south of the city of Ottawa, which is the capital of our country. And part of my duty as guardian of this place is to take good care of the land. There's a great importance among Indigenous people in Canada in the attachment to the land itself and how the land lives and breathes. So I'm trying to do my part to learn more about that and to be a good custodian of the land on which I live. And one of my learnings through the time that we've been confronting a very difficult history with Indigenous people inflicted upon them by settlers is that I don't own the land. The land owns me, and I rent it is how I see it. I own the house that sits on it, but nobody wants that. The land is the piece of value, and I'm delighted to be able to live and work and play here. As I said, I'm the CEO of the Canadian Nurses Association, CNA. And CNA is the national and global professional voice of Canadian nursing. And we have members who are registered nurses, licensed practical nurses, nurse practitioners, and registered psychiatric nurses right across the country. And there's 440,000 nurses in Canada. They're not all members of CNA, but it's a fairly large workforce across the country. Within CNA, we launched the Academy of Nursing in the late fall of 2019. And as part of that program, we installed the first fellows of the Academy of Nursing in October. I think I have it right, October or November, I'm forgetting now the date, of 2020. Everything about 2020 is a fog for the reasons you all know. And I'm delighted to say that Laurie Gottlieb is a charter fellow of the Academy and will be leading us off today. There is a series of speakers, and when we close today, I'm going to share with you the next two, which are in September and November, and we would be delighted to have you join us at those as well. The intention of our event today, just so you'll understand the flow, is that Dr. Gottlieb, Laurie Gottlieb, is going to start us off by speaking about some of the history of strengths-based nursing and healthcare, and she's an icon in our country as a nurse leader, and certainly in her entire background in this area of leadership. And she'll bring us to the point of talking about current projects going on across the country related to strengths-based. We then have guests from different countries who are going to speak or have video, because for some of them, God love them, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. We just had Lindsay on, it was 1 o'clock, he said, in Australia, Tasmania, I think he said. And some of you may be the same. So you'll see those videos and conversations, people talking about how they've used strengths-based or how it's been implemented and so on in their country, or is it working, is it not working, that sort of update. And then we have time for a good hour or so of conversation, and where we can have some back and forth with those speakers, and then some time with Laurie, and finally with Bruce Gottlieb. So let me introduce three very special people, then I promise I'll stop talking and we can move along. Dr. Laurie Gottlieb is professor in the Ingram School of Nursing at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, where she holds the Flora Madeline Shaw Chair of Nursing. That's always felt a bit special to me, Laurie, because of course, Flora Madeline Shaw was the president of the Canadian Nurses Association, and I assume that's why the chair was named. Sorry, excuse me, I'm doing two screens. Laurie is the nurse scholar in residence at the CIUSSS-Centre Ouest, based at the Jewish General Hospital in Montreal, and the visiting professor of leadership with us at the Canadian Nurses Association. She was the former director of McGill University's Ingram School of Nursing and was the editor-in-chief of the Canadian Journal of Nursing Research for 22 years. Pardon me. Laurie initially earned her registered nurse diploma from the Jewish General Hospital, then went on to achieve baccalaureate and master's degrees in nursing and a doctorate in developmental psychology from McGill University. She's the developer of strengths-based nursing and healthcare that evolved from the McGill Model of Nursing, famous in our country again, to which she was a major contributor. She is currently the principal investigator of a research study on strengths-based nursing healthcare leadership, which is supported by Canadian Institute for Health Research and social, oh, you're going to have to help me. What's SHIRK? Social Sciences Research. Help me, Laurie. I can't remember SHIRK.
It's Social Science and Humanities Research Council.
Council. Oh, that's the word. Thank you very much. I didn't do my homework. Suddenly couldn't remember. So they have funded this through the Productive Work Partnership Grant. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Annie Chevrier, who's going to step in and then be the moderator for the rest of the session, and I'll come back way at the other end. Annie is an assistant professor at the Ingram School of Nursing, an associate member of the Institute of Health Sciences Education, and member of the Faculty Development Committee. She's the program director of online education initiatives and continuing nursing education, and is a member of the Ingram School of Nursing Strengths-Based Advisory Board. She currently is involved in the development and launch of the undergraduate nurse entry program, the first online academic program at McGill University. Annie obtained her undergraduate, baccalaureate degree and graduate degrees in nursing from McGill, and has worked in advanced practice nursing roles at the CIUSSS-Centre and the McGill University Health Center. She holds a certification in medical surgical nursing from the Canadian Nurses Association. Thank you, Annie, for that. And she's the president of the Canadian Association of Medical and Surgical Nursing. She's a collaborator on Dr. Gottlieb's research study on strengths-based nursing and healthcare leadership. And finally, but by no means least, another Gottlieb, another Dr. Gottlieb, Dr. Bruce Gottlieb, who is related to Dr. Laurie Gottlieb, as you may imagine, and many of you already know this. And we say is our honorary nurse. Bruce is a full member of the McGill Center for Translational Research in Cancer, project director at the Lady Davis Institute for Medical Research, adjunct professor in School of Nursing and member in the Department of Human Genetics at McGill University, and curator of the androgen receptor mutations database. Dr. Gottlieb's research program is focused on trying to understand the genetics of breast and prostate cancer by examining mutations in a particular gene called the androgen receptor. His hypothesis is that cancer might be a result of Darwinian selection, pardon me, that occurs inside the cellular structure of an individual organism. In other words, selection may be taking place at the micro level and not only at the species level. It's my great pleasure to thank Laurie, Annie, and Bruce for joining us, and all of our other speakers who you'll see today. And also to say that I'm so thrilled that beyond being colleagues, they are great friends. So I hope you enjoy the session. We think it's going to be a really engaging day, and I can't wait. So Laurie, I promise I shall now cease and desist and turn it over to you, and have a great time.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mike. I am so really thrilled and honored that so many of you have joined us and made the time to join this seminar or webinar or summit, whatever you want to call it, from near and far, those who are in this time zone and those who are in time zones around the world. It truly is an honor to have every one of you join us and to share in this very special session. I also want to thank Mike, who, as he said, is not only a dear colleague and friend. I'm truly grateful for Mike and his team at CNA, who dedicated one of the Changemakers speaker series to strengths-based nursing in healthcare. And of course, to Bruce Gottlieb and our team at the Ingram School of Nursing, who has made this event happen. And to both my colleagues in CNA and the Academy for being our hosts of this event today. So when Mike suggested July 14th as a date, my first thought was that, oh my God, this is the storming of the Bastille Day. And how would I know this? Well, it's my best friend's birthday today. And I thought, oh my goodness, how appropriate. Isn't this a holiday? But it is a holiday in France, as we know. And my second thought was, similar to the French Revolution, could SBNH have the potential to be a very small, tiny revolution in changing and revolutionizing and transforming our healthcare system? So in the next 50 minutes or so, I'm going to talk to you about why SBNH. I'm going to talk a little bit about how did SBNH come about. What is SBNH for some of you who are very familiar with it? This will be a review. For others, it will help your understanding of SBNH. And then I'm going to talk about what we're doing to implement SBNH. Now, we all remember back in January of 2020, it was great excitement as the World Health Organization declared 2020 to be the year of the nurse. And they chose 2020 to be the year of the nurse because it coincided with Florence Nightingale's 200th anniversary since her birth. Both all nursing associations and all nursing organizations called upon, including the International Council of Nurses, Canadian Nursing Association, Nursing Now, called on us to make nursing visible and called for investment in nursing and sounded the urgent need to help develop nursing leadership. So this was our clarion call of what we were to accomplish in 2020. But COVID-19 intervened, as we all know, and nursing and COVID-19 amplified and shone light and made nursing visible. What had been called for by all these organizations at the beginning of the year. What we found out is that COVID-19 amplified nursing's contribution. Nursing leaders, as we know, stepped forward and were at the forefront in planning, organizing, and mobilizing care. With their superb skills of management, prioritizing, improvising, agility, these skills were called into play. We know that nurses have always been considered the backbone of the healthcare system, but never more so than during COVID-19. With this novel virus, nurse and no known treatment, no playbook to fall back on, nurses became one of the system's most valuable resources. Nurses have been considered by many to be the backbone, but it was nurses' knowledge and skills that were in desperate need. And in fact, one of my colleagues told me that during the height of the pandemic, nurses were really manning the hospital. COVID-19 also helped nurses rediscover and reconnect and begin to value, as did others, the fundamentals of nursing care and the centrality of compassionate relational care. And nurses began to partner with families and colleagues, as often taking the place of families who could not who could not be present with their loved ones during their most distressing and difficult periods of the pandemic. Nurses also partnered with colleagues in ways they had never done before. And there was a leveling of the hierarchical structure as all talents were called upon to deal with the challenges of COVID-19. COVID-19 also amplified the fault lines in the healthcare system. It magnified the problems that we have been talking about for the last 40 years, that we are basically, our healthcare system worldwide, and particularly in Canada, is fragmented, it's deficit-based, and it's disease-focused. And we saw this problem as it exhibited itself with long-term and the dismantling, the systematic dismantling of public health and primary care. It also magnified the problems with when efficiency had trumped effectiveness in caring, and we saw this when there was few were prepared to deal with the pandemic, few had the resources and the equipment that was badly needed. Moreover, it magnified that, in fact, family-centered care, which most institutions, most organizations boasts about having, is more rhetoric than reality. And this was really pointed out in David Naylor's report. And it amplified the looming crisis in nursing workforce and leadership, the problems that we're all facing in terms of retaining and sustaining an adequate nursing workforce and attracting new nurse managers and new nurse leaders. And in fact, just yesterday in the Montreal Gazette, written by ER doctors to the government of the impending, what they called shipwreck of the healthcare system, warning them that the elastic can only be stretched so far. And they were the ones who talked about the looming nurse shortage and the unsafe nurse to patient ratios. Now, I came across this quote in an article that was written to talk about the court system in the United States. And I thought, oh my goodness, how apropos this is to our healthcare system. And so the Chief Justices and the Conference of State Court Administrators wrote this: COVID-19 is not the disruption that the court, and I substitute healthcare system, wanted, but it is the disruption that the court, and in our case, the healthcare system, needed. So why SBNH? SBNH is about, has a vision, and it's about humanizing healthcare through compassionate, knowledgeable, strengths-based nursing in healthcare. It is based on a series of values, and this is what the vision is. This is what we would like to see our healthcare system become. SBNH, and I'll be calling strengths-based nursing in healthcare by its acronym, SBNH is about reclaiming nursing values for the 21st century by providing an approach that operationalizes family-centered care so that rhetoric actually becomes reality. It's about empowering nurses to find voice and to exercise agency in all their roles. It's about valuing the centrality of relationships, connections, collaboration, and partnerships. People need people, and it's about investment in relationships. And it's about capitalizing and developing strengths to optimize function, both at the person level, at the unit level, at the organization level, at the community level, and at the society level. So I want to spend a few moments talking about how did SBNH come about. I get this question often, and I will just spend a few moments trying to explain how did I come to develop these ideas. And everyone is familiar with this very famous quote by Isaac Newton, in which he wrote, "If I have seen further than others, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." And I have been very fortunate in that I have been able to stand on the shoulders of many giants. And because of their work, I have been able to take this a bit further. So I just want to talk about some of the major influences that influenced my own development and my own thinking. The first begins with the fact that my sense of identity and my values are very closely tied to my family, the time in which I was born, my education, and my very early experiences. Very few of you know, some of you do know, that I was born a twin on January 1st, just after the war. In fact, my twin sister and I were the first baby boomers born in Canada. The first photo taken of me, as you can see in the right-hand corner, was published on the front page of the Montreal Standard. And I was being held by a nurse. And in fact, my name was suggested by a nurse. So my future was determined in the few days right after my birth. Now, I was born into a very loving Jewish family, steeped in ethical, moral, humanistic values and practices. I had a father who suffered from a chronic lung condition, who never defined himself by his condition, nor limited what he could do because of it. There was a strong valuing of education and learning in our family, and a passion and a commitment for nursing that I developed at the age of the ripe old age of 5, when I witnessed public health nurses who came to our home to care for my father during one of his acute exacerbations, and when I bore witness to the power of nursing and the compassion of nurses. As many of you know, David Foote's book, Bamboos and Echo, published in 1996, he theorized that the year you were born is probably one of the best predictors or determinants of one's success based on because of the political, social, economic conditions. And as the first baby boomers, so many opportunities opened to me. I was blessed to receive my formal education at the Jewish General Hospital and then McGill University, and McGill University had thought leaders who envisioned an independent role for nurses. They imagined what nursing was and what nursing could be. I had wonderful, supportive mentors who invested in me and who showed by example how to show up, how to persevere, how with courage, commitment, and persistence to achieve a goal. I had wonderful students who challenged me, and colleagues and peers who went on in their own work and who were generous enough to share the ideas that they had learned at McGill, how they played out in the clinical area. Because SBNH is a practice derived based on the experiences and practices and insights of nurses. And then I was blessed to be in the right place at the right time, McGill being a research intensive university, and to be hired as one of the first nurse researchers in the first research unit of nursing and healthcare established in 1974 by the late Dr. Maura Allen, and to study and to receive my doctorate in McGill's psychology department, renowned for its rigor of thought and research. Just very quickly to tell you about how SBNH has evolved. It really began really very early with Bertha Harmer, who was the second director of the School of Nursing, and the School of Nursing has just celebrated its 100th anniversary. But Bertha Harmer, the second director in 1929, wrote a very important book. In fact, it was the first book since Florence Nightingale's book on Notes on Nursing. And she wrote the book called A Textbook for the Principles and Practices of Nursing, which was the essential nursing textbook written in her time. She also wrote the book, Methods and Principles of Teaching and Practices, Principles and Practices of Nursing. And her first edition was published in 1922, with subsequent editions in 1928 and 1934. And it was her ideas that really permeated the drinking water, as one of my colleagues would say, of the Ingram School of Nursing. And when I look back and reread her books, I could see so many of the critical and seminal ideas in strengths-based nursing rooted in Bertha Harmer's books. So this was part of our drinking water, and this was passed on oral tradition to oral tradition from generation to generation. In 1975, Dr. Maura Allen wrote about, created the series called Situation Responsive Nursing to distinguish McGill's approach from other nursing approaches, and this was at the time when nursing was discussing and debating how they were going to expand their role. Now, in situation responsive nursing, Dr. Allen identifies strengths versus deficits. These ideas were then integrated into our curriculum, and as our students went out into the clinical practice and began to experiment and develop and innovate with these ideas, I then relabeled it as McGill Model of Nursing to acknowledge the contribution of our McGill community to the development of the McGill Model of Nursing. The next step was in 1998 when Bruce and myself reworked those ideas within the McGill Model of Nursing. It reconnected to Nightingale's ideas about innate capacities for health and healing, and re-linked to the biological basis of nursing. And then Nancy Feely and myself wrote a book called Collaborative Partnership, An Approach to Care, as we began to really try to put more meat on the bones. And then I was going to work on a book called Working with Strengths. And lo and behold, that book, it wasn't about working with strengths. It began to evolve into a philosophy and a value-driven approach called strengths-based nursing. So the caterpillar had evolved and gave rise to this butterfly. So what is SBNH? So SBNH is an alternative worldview to the deficit model. It's a value-driven philosophy and framework that guides clinicians, leaders, educators, and research. It is about uncovering, discovering, and developing strengths, and it's about leveraging strengths to promote health and healing. And I'll just quickly go through each of those very quickly. So SBNH is an alternative worldview to the deficit model, which is our current model in the healthcare system. And as we know, the deficit model predominates the model of practice, and its focus is on problem and fixing the problem, and ignores the other links that are compensating for the problem. So as we know, the deficit model, in the deficit model, and I'm just going to compare and contrast the two approaches. In the deficit model, the healthcare provider is the healer. In the strengths-based approach or philosophy, the person and families are self-healers. And the role of the nurse, going back to Nightingale, is to create the conditions for healing. The deficit model focuses on disease and tends to pathologize, whereas in strengths-based, the focus is on a holistic, a health-promoting experience. And I look at even PTSD. We look at PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and we also look at post-traumatic growth that results from traumatic events. If I was to choose a letter to depict each approach, the deficit predominant letter in the alphabet would be D. If you think about it, disease, deficiency, damage, defective, deficit, dysfunction. And if I were to pick the three letters in the alphabet that really align with strengths-based nursing and healthcare, SBNH, it would be C's for health: courage, commitment, competence, capabilities, compassion, caring, choice, control. P's, all this requires patience, power, and persistence, and R's for healing, of repair, rehabilitate, recovery. The deficit is very much of a paternalistic model with a very hierarchical structure concentrated in the provider. It tends to be detached, and it's about being told what to do and how to fix it, whereas strengths-based is really a partnership where persons and families find their own solutions with guidance. They're engaged, there's power sharing because it recognizes that both have expertise. And this deficit approach tends to ask, what is the matter? Whereas a strengths approach asks, what is the matter, as well as what matters to you. It's about doing for as well in the deficit while doing with, and context is very, very important in the strengths-based approach. So problems and deficits are just one part of the whole. Now, I want to make it very clear, SBNH does not ignore problems and does not ignore deficits. They recognize that it's just one part of the whole, and it's important to look at the whole. So it's a value-driven philosophy and framework that guides clinicians, leaders, and educators, and it is an embodied approach. As my friend Pam, who you'll meet shortly, says, it's a way of being, how one chooses to show up as a clinician, a leader, an educator, a researcher. It is integrated and integral to who one is and becomes part of one's professional identity. It is I have found that many SBNH thinkers, practitioners have not labeled themselves as such, but when you look at their practice, this is who they are, and this is what they believe nursing to be, and this is how they aspire to practice. And once we begin to articulate and give public language, and that's why it's important, then we can function with intentionality. The other aspect of SBNH is about noticing, uncovering, and discovering and developing strengths. So SBNH is about finding the balance. We humans are wired to see deficits, and of course, that is the mechanism of survival. If we weren't alert to danger and threat, the human race would not have survived. So we have to recognize our biology, that there's a built-in negativity bias, and that in fact, memory stores more negatives than positives. So in adopting an SBNH approach, we are having to deal with this negativity bias. But we also have to recognize that humans are also wired for strengths, because strengths are needed for growth and development, thriving, optimizing, functioning, and connecting. And we can rewire our brain to look for and notice strengths. SBNH is about, as Henry David Thoreau in this wonderful quote, he wrote, "It's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see." And so SBNH is about noticing strengths, what you see, paying attention with intention, and strengths existing at the biological, person, family level. It includes capacities, capabilities, and strengths are to be discovered, developed, and amplified. So I want to tell you a little bit about a case to illustrate this. And I'm going to talk to you about nurse and introduce you to nurse Christina Rosnes, who at the time of telling me this story was a clinical nurse specialist in a plain clinic of a very large children's hospital here in Montreal. And she told me the story of one of her clients, a very large, very angry woman called Mrs. Saunders, who had an 11-year-old son who suffered from intractable pain. And Mrs. Saunders used both her size and her anger to bully and intimidate the healthcare team. And in their first encounter, Christina saw something that the other care team members had not seen. The other team members had labeled Mrs. Saunders as difficult, demanding, and uncooperative. But what Christina saw was a very protective and loving mother who wanted to get the best care for her son. Because the healthcare team had labeled her difficult, demanding, and cooperative, their response was to avoid her, to ignore what she wanted, and to deny what she was saying. Whereas Christina, who looked and saw a loving mother, but what she did see was that she didn't know how to advocate effectively for her son. And her work with this mother was to help her find a better way of how to get how to achieve her goal of getting the best care for her son, but in doing it in a way that was effective. So SBNH is about noticing, uncovering, and discovering strengths, but we do this. The purpose of looking for strengths and noticing strengths and discovering strengths, you have to say, what's the purpose? And the purpose is to leverage strengths to promote health and facilitate healing. Now we know that strengths exist at the biological, the person, and the unit level. We know in terms of the biological, we could talk about collateral circulations, We could talk about plasticity at the person level. We could talk about capabilities and skills and competencies. And at the unit level, we could look at what in our organization is working best, what are the resources within our organization. But we need to look for strengths and work with strengths and utilize strengths in order to contain, compensate, and motivate the problems and the deficits. So it is a way of leveraging strengths to optimize functioning. I was reading this book, Splendid in the Vile, which is about Churchill's early days after he took over as prime ministership of the UK, just as Hitler was planning to invade the UK. And the book is about based on the journals of people who worked closely with Churchill. And you know, those first months and years were quite harrowing. And it was Churchill's leadership that kept it together. And so I read this quote and I thought, my gosh, Churchill was a strengths-based leader. So at the end of the book, it says, the wife of the information minister, Diana Cooper, told Winston Churchill that one of the best things he had done was to give the people courage. He did not agree. I never gave them courage, Churchill said. I was able to focus theirs. So leaders create the conditions for people to discover their own strengths and to use those strengths and to mobilize those strengths to overcome and deal with their issues. We know that SBNH is a value-driven approach, and it's underpinned by 4 core foundations, and the core foundations are person-family centered, empowerment, innate capacities for health and healing, and relationship focused. These are the foundations under which SBNH rests. And those foundations are operationalized in 8 core values, which I will be illustrating in a moment. I'm going to illustrate it through a video that one of my I'm going to show you that I worked with one of my colleagues, Andrea Cook. Now, I was working with these oncology nurses, a group of wonderful nurses, and we were studying together in a reflective practice context, strengths-based nursing. So I'll let Andrea speak for herself.
I want to talk to you about Alexa and her mother, whom I met when she was 34 years old and just diagnosed with breast cancer. When discussing strength-based nursing, I want to focus on the last 2 weeks of Alexa's life. Something beautiful happened while supporting this family during this time, something that's almost impossible to put into words. Strength-based nursing made it happen. The relationship between Alexa and her mother had a long history of conflict that predated her cancer diagnosis. It was characterized by periods of support, and then conflict would occur, during which time they wouldn't speak for months. I found myself in a difficult position and chose to remain neutral while interacting with Alexa and her mother. There were times that Alexa asked me not to speak with her mother, and because of patient confidentiality, I would respect that. I met Alexa and her mother on the day that Alexa received her diagnosis and followed this family closely for the next 6 years until her death this past November. At the time of her diagnosis, Alexa was working and going to school part-time. She was not married, had no children, and was fiercely independent. While Alexa was undergoing treatment, her mother tried to convince her to move back home so that she could care for her, but Alexa refused. She remained in her apartment up until 2 weeks before she died. I came to appreciate how important it was for Alexa to be in control and to exercise control over her life and her situation. Yet it was also important for her mother to protect and nurture her daughter. Their needs were often at odds, and I found that nursing them was a delicate balance. This past fall, Alexa's liver metastases were no longer responding to chemotherapy. Tests indicated that her liver was starting to fail, and Alexa was admitted to hospital. Alexa's mother had told me that one of her greatest fears was to get a phone call saying that Alexa had been found dead in her apartment. It was important for her to be involved in Alexa's end-of-life care. However, without consulting Alexa, she began to make arrangements to provide end-of-life care for her in her home. I recognized that her mother meant well, but I also knew that Alexa did not want this. I asked her mother, if Alexa could not be discharged to your home, is there somewhere else she could be discharged to that you would be content with? She told me about a hospice close to her home that she would be able to visit often. Shortly after, unbeknownst to Alexa that her mother had talked to me, Alexa asked me, is it too late for me to go to a hospice? I told her no, that it was actually a perfect time to look into this. We spoke about different options, and she finally said she liked the idea of going to a hospice residence that would be close to where her mother lived. After our conversation, Alexa took a deep breath and said, wow, I feel like a huge weight has been taken off my shoulders. It's weird getting excited about planning hospice care, but now I realize that regardless of how much time I have left, I am in charge of how I spend that time. So the next few days were spent working on the application to the residence. I sat on the side of her bed and quietly read out parts of the application for her to sign. She said to me, okay, let's do this. The application was accepted and Alexa was transferred to the hospice residence. The morning she left the hospital to go into hospice care, Alexa got herself dressed. Apparently, when she got to the residence, her room had floor-to-ceiling windows on one wall that looked out onto snow-covered trees. According to her mother, Alexa visibly relaxed, and within 2 hours of arriving at the residence, she slipped into a coma. She died 2 days later with her brother and her mother at her bedside. So now that I've spoken to you about Alexa, I want to speak to you about how my nursing interventions were guided by the values of strength-based nursing. When I helped Alexa and her mother both achieve a level of peace and acceptance, I was being guided by the value of healing. When I honored Alexa's need for independence and being in control, I was being guided by the value of uniqueness. When I appreciated both Alexa and her mother as individuals, as well as their interconnectedness, I was being guided by the value of holism. When I understood both Alexa's goal and her mother's goal for end-of-life care, I was being guided by the value of created meaning. When I was present and listened carefully to Alexa and her mother's fears and was able to alleviate their fears, I was being guided by the value of person-environment. When I discussed end-of-life options with both Alexa and her mother separately, I was being guided by the value of self-determination. When I listened for cues that Alexa was ready to discuss where she wanted to die, I was being guided by the value of learning, readiness, and timing. And when I respected both Alexa and her mother's needs and goals and worked to find a common ground, I was being guided by the value of collaborative partnership.
My big aha moment was when my book came out and I was invited by the Nagel to write an article on leadership as it relates to strengths-based nursing. And one night when I was thinking about it, I thought, if these are the values that guide clinicians, can we use the same values to see how they could guide leaders in terms of how they work with staff and create healthy workplace environments for their staff? And so gave birth to looking at leadership through and developing the SBNH leadership value wheel with this underlying foundation. So they're the same foundations. We have changed some of the words to make them more compatible and relatable to leaders and to the practice settings. And so you'll see holism became systems thinking, subjective reality became multiple perspectives, but they are basically the same values. I've been collecting stories from nurse stories about nurses during COVID-19 at the CIUSSS-Centre Ouest. And one of the people I interviewed was Serge Cloutier. He was the director adjoint à la direction des soins infirmiers at the Jewish General Hospital at the CIUSSS-Centre Ouest. And when he told me the story, his story, one of the challenges he had was they received a directive to expand from a 24 to a 78 critical care bed unit at the Jewish General Hospital. The Jewish General Hospital, very early in the COVID pandemic, was designated as the hospital that would receive the COVID patients because they had negative pressure rooms. He was given this directive to expand from 24 to 78 critical beds, and they had about 2 weeks to expand. After he recovered the pit in his stomach and recognized the enormity of what was being asked, he told me the story, and I was able to fit it into many of the values. So he, Serge embodies an SBNH approach to leadership. These were some of the questions he asked of himself. Systems thinking. What do I need to consider in creating 54 new critical care beds? How will other units be affected? Do we have the nurses, the equipment, the space? Where can we secure what we need without putting other patients or staff at risk? The uniqueness. He asked himself, what is unique about this situation? What is similar and different from other situations I have dealt with in the past? What are the strengths and resources within my team and my organization, and how quickly can I mobilize them? He was concerned about the impact these changes would have on his nurses, what he needed to do to protect his staff and the patients, what would enable himself to cope with all the stress that he was undergoing and that of the team, so he could be there for his team. And that's the value of health and healing. He asked himself who would be impacted by this change, how, and what was their understanding of the situation. He looked at the questions of what decisions needed to be made, what decisions or what areas were under his control, what was under nursing's control, and what information did he need to have in order to make these decisions, the value of self-determination. He asked himself which units were best equipped to care for COVID-19 patients, which units could be converted and equipped sufficiently in a timely manner, and what staff could be retrained, and how could they support one another as they move patients from the units that they then designated as COVID units. When I say Serge, he did this with his wonderful colleagues at the Jewish General Hospital. In terms of learning and timing, he asked himself how long it would take to prepare his staff to care for COVID-19 patients, what do they need to know, and in collaborative partnership, how did he needed to think about how he showed up as a leader, how did he support his team, what type of example he could give to his team. Now, when he was telling me the story, he obviously wasn't going through each of the values, but in listening to his story, we could fit into the values, and we could use those values as a checklist to see what is missing and what else, what other factors and considerations need to be thought about. So what's interesting about SBNH, because it is about creating healthy environments, there is an alignment between an approach to care, a philosophy, a framework of care for clinicians that aligns with a leadership, the same leadership philosophy or approach that helps leaders create healthy workplace environments for their staff, which is the same types of values that could guide educators in creating healthy learning environments for students. So we have an alignment between care, education, and leadership, and we have broken down silos. So the next section I want to talk about is how we are beginning to implement SBNH and creating SBNH cultures and practices across Canada and across the world. I love this quote from Bruno Bettelheim in his book, The Uses of Enchantment, and he wrote about development, and I apply it to here. Contrary to the ancient myth, wisdom does not spring forth fully developed like Athenia out of Zeus's head. It is built up small step by small step, often from irrational beginnings. So our first understanding of how to implement this is we were asked to write, I was asked to write an article for the Journal of Family Nursing. And when I asked Janet Bell what she was looking for, she said how you were implementing it. And so Bruce and myself sat down and we reflected back on what we had been doing for the past, 3 years. And basically this was the process of implementation. There was a pre-commitment phase and an adoption phase. And I'm going to go through some of these phases, and some of these steps. The first step was raising awareness, finding champions and early adopters. And we were lucky that people came forward very quickly to say, this is an important book, this is a game changer. Julia Shamian, who they went on to become the president of the ICN, the International Council of Nurses, she read a pre-publication and she said, Laurie, what you've done is written a game changer, which kind of surprised me. And she got behind us in terms of promoting these ideas and recognizing that these importance. Then Pam Hoobley, who has been a partner and a clinical partner right from the beginning, we had many opportunities to talk and she was on board and she said, this is what I would like to bring to SickKids. She was at that time in her position as Director of Nursing, and we talked about how we could bring SBNH to a hospital for sick kids. Another early adopter or early champion was a point of care nurse, a bedside nurse, Jeanette Schoen, who read my book, tried out some ideas, contacted me and asked me whether I would mentor her as she would like to bring it to Holland Bloorview, who became a second partner on our grant. And then there was Bessie Bissis, who at that time was in the role of a head nurse. My aunt was on the palliative care unit. Her nursing was exquisite. I was going to China to talk about SBNH. I interviewed Bessie as a head nurse to ask her how she created that type of culture within her unit. And she became an early adopter, an early champion. The second step was deepening understanding. And in several hospitals and organizations, we set up book clubs to begin to study what was SBNH. And we had book clubs taking place and reflective practice sessions in Holland Bloorview, at Hospital for Sick Kids, at the Jewish General Hospital, etc. Then a group of us, Holland Bloorview, Sick Kids, the Institute, we organized a symposium that was very well attended to, very exciting, and that symposium was called Creating and Sustaining Strengths-Based Care Environments. It was a whole day symposium and incredibly well received, and people started sharing their own experiences in trying to implement SBNH, and it was about how to make the transformation happen. The third step was trying out and testing out. And as I said, I was running study groups at the Jewish General Hospital, reflective practice sessions with a number of groups at the Jewish General Hospital. My colleague, Christina Clausen, who is a coordinator at the McGill Nursing Collaborator, decided and undertook to evaluate what was the impact of these sessions. And she looked at, and she interviewed the people who had attended these sessions and who had participated. And what she discovered was what they experienced was a process of rediscovering the essence of nursing by examining and connecting to and claiming purpose. And the impact of these sessions was that they were able to detect the deficit model, they were able to identify and label strengths, they were able to reframe issues within a strengths-based lens, and they were able to acquire strengths-based and nursing language. And this impact was felt both personally, a transformation in themselves, how they interacted with their team, how they interacted with patients and families, and how they interacted at an organizational level. The fourth step was retraining and reorienting. And what we recognized, this is no small feat and no small ambition, was that we needed to integrate SBNH into our educational curriculum. And that's what we did at the Ingram School of Nursing and other universities made the decision that SBNH would be their philosophy of care, their philosophy of nursing that underpinned both their graduate and undergraduate programs. And this required a retraining of educators. Now, you'll hear that different educational institutions have adopted different ways of integrating SBNH as part of their educational curriculum. Parallel to integrating changing education is also changing practice settings. And that required the retraining of leaders and managers and integrating it into the workplace. So these two processes, we're trying to really change two major systems, our educational system and our healthcare system. I'm going to skip this slide, but we did create an institute, and we had several projects going. It was called the International Institute for Strengths-Based Nursing in Healthcare. Our first project was to develop a leadership management training program, and the second was to develop stories and story sharing as a way of transforming people's thinking. I love this quote by Louis Pasteur that chance favors the prepared mind and opportunity favors the bold. Our problem was how to fund all these initiatives. And just as we were discussing and recognizing this was a huge limitation, lo and behold, social science and humanities and Canadian Institutes of Health Research got together for the first time to create a healthy, productive work partnership grants. These were about grants that were offered to create healthy, productive workplace. And because we already had partners, and they had to be multidisciplinary, and it had to include both social science, which was our, and humanities, which was our story sharing, and dealt with healthcare, we felt we were in a good position to apply for one of the grants. We had maybe 3 or 4 weeks to do this. And so we applied for funding, and the first stage of funding was a partnership development grant, and our grant was transforming nurses' work-life environments through training clinical leaders and management in strengths-based nursing using innovative forms of story sharing. And 20 grants were awarded from across Canada. They were 2 years, and the focus was on developing partnerships and creating a methodology to create stories that could be used. And we had film crews going in to really capture the realities of the workplace. We developed and piloted this leadership management training program using story sharing, modules, and mentorship. We then went on to apply. Those who had been successful at stage 1, phase 1, could apply for phase 2, which was really the carrot that lured us in, because this was going to be a very multi-million-dollar grant. And so we applied, and we were one of the successful ones to receive this grant. And it was about transforming nurses' work environments through a strengths-based leadership and management training program.
Laurie, it's Mike. 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
I'm almost done. Okay, so then we had, so these were our partners, CNA, Sick Kids, Concordia, and we have 5, partners. And this is our team. We are 11 co-investigators, 8 collaborators, and a rich group of consultants. We are going to be starting the training program in 2021, and it's a 6-month program with a training component and a mentorship component. I won't go through the definition, it will be on the website, but if you are interested, we could send you, this is our definition of leadership, which is guiding the evaluation. The online program will be in, there's 3 segments and with 12 modules. And there is a mentorship component to ensure sustainability when people leave the classroom and go back into the real world of practice. We've identified some essential conditions for implementation, and when the unit is in crisis, or there's competing demands, or there's people don't feel prepared, that's not one of the essential conditions for implementation. But when values align and the beliefs of SB and leaders have the skills to lead and make change, and commitment goes, within and beyond nursing. And there's energy and a critical mass of early champions. Those are conditions that allow for the implementation. And so our fifth step now is creating this SBNH communities of practice. And we're trying to build cultures of community building and connecting and collaborating. And I love this quote: when you light a fire, you don't know how far it will spread. And what we have found is that we have champions. We have pockets of commitment. We sent out a survey, 28 countries responded, and we have examples of countries from in all the different continents and in many parts of the world. And so I want to leave the last word to Florence Nightingale when she spoke at the Congress on Hospice and Dispensaries and Nursing in 1893. She wrote, "May we hope that when we are dead and gone, leaders will arise who have personally experienced in the hard practical work the difficulties and joys of organizing nursing reform and will lead far beyond anything we have done." And we hope we are fulfilling Nightingale's vision. And so I would like to thank, and it takes a collective for this to come about. First of all, the Canadian Nursing Association and the Canadian Academy, Bruce and Mike for organizing this summit, Alicia from the CNA, Anna, Tina, and Joanna of McGill University. And I would like to thank goodness, Catherine Loeb, who helped me with these slides. And so now, I'm sorry if I've gone a little over. The time is, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Is it still 5 minutes, Mike?
Yes, thanks. First, let me say thank you, Laurie, for the gorgeous presentation. And sorry I jumped in there at the end. I didn't know if you're watching the time. Just beautiful, and what a great overview. I wanted to share, there's been some comments coming in. Deborah Barra from Los Angeles is saying she's enjoying it and uses this in her work. Thank you, Laurie. I've used your model to guide my work. That is from, oh, I'm missing the name. Okay, I can't find it this second. Oh, here it is. Oh, it's Deborah Shepherd Lemoyne, Lemoyne Shepherd. And so there's nice comments in there, and we'll come back to those. So thank you very much for the great lead off, Laurie. And I learned a lot. I love the picture of you when you were a new grad. That was great. The picture, the slide that has the nurses holding you and your sister, and then the one of you. Yeah, it was great. It's a great picture of you.
I started off the cover of a newspaper worldwide, Canada wide, and it's been downhill ever since. Not about
Stop it. All right. Thanks very much, Laurie. So colleagues, wherever you are, we're going to stop for 5 or 6 minutes. You're going to see a slide parked here that Laurie, if you'll stop sharing, Alicia will put her just a sort of slide to hold us in place. So make the time. Another nice comments from Irene Andrus. We'll save them all for you, Laurie. And we'll see you all in about 5 or 6 minutes, and we'll move on to hear from our other speakers. Thank you very much.
No, sorry, totally. Why do you think it was?
Over to you, Annie.
Thank you, Mike. So now we start another exciting part of our time together, which will be the panelist presentations. The Canadian Nurses Association and the, pardon me, I lost my, and the Canadian Academy of Nursing, in collaboration with Dr. Laurie Gottlieb's partnership study on strengths-based nursing and healthcare leadership, are proud to present this global checkup on strengths-based nursing and healthcare. To orchestrate the mini presentations that you're going to be hearing today, members of the research study prepared, disseminated, and reviewed the results of an outreach survey, which was sent to 162 champions and early adopters of strengths-based nursing and healthcare from 28 countries across the globe. Many of you are here today joining us. Based on the responses that we received, we invited 5 presenters from across the world who represent a cross-section between research, education, practice to participate in this global checkup. We hope that these mini presentations will give you an opportunity to listen, to share with these nursing leaders, educators, practitioners, and researchers from around the globe. They will be sharing their stories on how they came to strengths-based nursing and healthcare and how they integrated this approach into their work. The presentations will afterwards be followed by a Q&A question period with the presenter in the panel, as well as a Q&A session with Dr. Gottlieb and her research team, Mélanie Lavoie-Tremblay and Pam Hubley. Next slide, please. The global presenters today that you will be spending time with are Dr. Lindsay Smith, Elizabeth Bernardino, Salix Espinoza Aliboga, Valérie Grenier, and Judith Lapierre. And I will be introducing them shortly before their presentation. So without further ado, we're going to start with Dr. Lindsay Smith. Lindsay started his nursing career in 1980 through the hospital and community positions, supporting families across the lifespan. He moved into university education in 1992 and received 2 major teaching awards for outstanding contributions to student learning in nursing. Lindsay is the current director for the International Family Nursing Association and deputy chair for the Tasmanian Human Research Ethics Committee. Recent academic career achievements have focused on translating research evidence to nursing practice, attracting both national and international recognition. Lindsay has developed the Australian Family Strengths Nursing Assessment Conversation Guide to help advance strengths-based nursing practice in Australia, which is recommended in the Queensland Royal Children's Hospital and Community Health Services in 2014, and the Child and Youth Health Practice Manual. Without further ado, let's listen to Dr. Smith.
Hello, my name is Dr. Lindsay Smith. I'm a nurse from Sydney, New South Wales, Australia, and I've been living and working as an academic in Launceston at the University of Tasmania for 21 years now. During this time, I've been active in bringing strength-based nursing and healthcare to the nursing courses and helping to embed a strengths-based wellbeing approach in the Tasmanian healthcare practices. The outcome of this work is now moving to a whole-of-government approach to child and youth wellbeing. As a nurse, I can now look back and see that I have been a strengths-based nurse my whole career, yet nursing and caring in a system that didn't support strengths, rather it focused on deficits. Strength-based nurse health theory and values allowed me to synthesize the struggles between the strengths-based and deficits paradigms that I found myself within. A strength of my nursing has been the relational approach that underpins strength-based nursing in healthcare, yet the system I was employed in had a tasks approach that met the needs of deficits independently of who had the deficit and the need for the task. The biomedical approach does provide great advantages to the treatment of disease, but is not complete without the drivers of restoration, health and well-being, strengths from the cellular to the interacting systems level. As the model of strength-based nurse and healthcare evolved, I had the privilege of growing in my understanding and practice of strengths, culminating in my education, practice, development, research, and scholarship in family strengths and strength-based nursing and healthcare. One of the earliest research projects that I was involved in was the Australian Family Strengths Research. I had a minor role as a voluntary research assistant in this, but from this I've developed a number of publications that are now recommended by the Queensland State Government in the Child and Youth Health Wellbeing Manual that is about embedding a strengths-based conversations into nursing and healthcare. The beauty of strengths-based nursing healthcare for me is the whole of systems approach it provides nursing, healthcare and research that meets what people are looking for to help them meet their health and wellbeing needs across their whole of life journey. Strengths-based nursing and healthcare explains the processes and the context that support people and families across their lifespan, from the past, the present, and the future to thrive. Strength-based nursing and healthcare helps reorientate the healthcare system from the traditionally extraordinarily successful yet increasingly challenged biomedical approach that does not address modernity's paradox. That is, a society's dramatic expansion of wealth alongside substantial threats to their children and youth health and wellbeing outcomes, when they are the ones who should be benefiting the most from such wealth. Strength-based nursing and healthcare helps to place the focus on the most important means of empowering holistic, enhanced outcomes across the lifespan, that is, on functional strengths. It is through strengths that people, families, and communities thrive, with the support they need to mitigate challenges and deficits. Together, building strengths and mitigating challenges provides the means for people to thrive most effectively. People's experiences from a dominated biomedical approach to nursing and healthcare is often a feeling of exclusion, isolation, and powerlessness. The outcomes of strength-based nursing and health, however, are what people want. Equality, as everyone has strengths that matter and work for them. Equity, as strength-based nursing and healthcare reorientates towards proportionate, universal healthcare to support strength, development, and engagement. And justice, as the barriers and determinants of health, well-being, and healing are removed as strengths grow. Strength-based nursing and healthcare informs my work as a nurse educator as I now strive towards collaborative co-design of learning material with students in real time across the semester with the stated aim of achieving shared understanding and learning outcomes. This has resulted in my most enjoyable teaching experiences in my awarded teaching career. During 2020, as the COVID-19 pandemic emerged and universities and many other spaces quickly embraced physical distancing and lockdowns, my teaching moved from a well-established and highly successful flipped classroom on-campus workshop to fully online workshops. I had no prior concept of how learners would respond to this urgent chaos and urgent change. So I asked them, and as a group of 140 Bachelor Nursing third-year students and 3 teaching academics, we embarked on developing a collaborative online learning experience that met the learning needs in the context of COVID-19. We focused on the strengths that each of us brought to the learning space and collaborated to develop new online learning experiences and material. We developed a shared understanding of online learning expectations and responsibilities with a focus on bringing forward strengths and equity. I assisted with creating student-generated shared learning activities. We flexibly negotiated assignment submission dates that sought to respond respectfully to individuals' context of COVID-19 challenges, ensuring that everyone, despite differing challenges from the COVID-19 pandemic, received equity in learning opportunities. Some students did struggle at the change from equality to equity in learning. However, after listening and stressing the strength-based nursing healthcare values that underpinned equity and what we were creating in the online space as a shared learning experience and with shared learning outcomes, all adopted the approach to the best of their capacity in the context that recognizing that not everyone was ready to make such monumental changes that, you know, in such a short space of time. So we did have to be rather flexible with individuals as well. The learning and teaching evaluations of these changes resulted in, the results were equally to any previous year's evaluations of learning and teaching. And we have continued with this approach as in Australia now we move forward in our COVID-19 context and response. For me, the impacts I've noticed through translating strength-based nursing and healthcare to practice, education and research is that strength-based nursing and healthcare places the control back in the hands of people and gives them hope. Strength-based nursing and healthcare respects people and their ability for decision-making and to make changes that are right for them and matters most to them. I focus on the strengths and decisions that matter most to them has a significant positive effect on the outcomes and enhances hope. It is through hope and sensing a means of moving forward through strengths that build collaboration. It is like hitting the collaboration button, one of the BN students recently said about translating a strength-based nursing and healthcare perspective to their nursing practice. As a strength-based nursing and healthcare practitioner, educator, researcher and scholar, I've noticed that learners respond with more enthusiasm. Government and policymakers not only listen more intently, they can see how to respond in a way that moves forward with people they serve. Nurses are excited to see that they can help make a difference and their independent nursing actions matter to people and families. And people respond with more enthusiasm, deeper trust and collaboration and appreciation, seeing that the things that matter to them matter to you. For me, strength-based nursing and healthcare happens in the spaces in between. that space in between where I want to operate in, yet at times my experiences and context still does not allow or support me to operate in it. Strength-based nursing in healthcare happens in that space in between where people want to live, as they know their best life chances and outcomes are found there. Yet the services and supports that they experience does not yet operate in that space. We are nurses helping people live in the space in between to develop and operationalise their strengths to their best advantage. Thank you very much for allowing me to share with you today. All the best.
Our next presentation will be from Dr. Elizabeth Bernardino, who is a nurse.
Hello, my name is Dr.
Who is a nurse and professor at the Federal University of Paraná, a public university in the south of Brazil in Curitiba. She holds a position as head division of care management at the Hospital de Clínicas Complex Paraná. We have the pleasure of having Dr. Bernardino joining us, and she'd like to say just a few words before we present her presentation.
Bonjour, bonjour à tout le monde. C'est avec plaisir que je suis ici. Un bonjour spécial à Laurie et à Bruce, ainsi qu'à mes collègues que j'ai connus il y a longtemps, 2-3 ans, je pense, Laurie et Bruce, et puis Judith Lapierre, ainsi qu'Epin, et Paula du Portugal, mais je suis bien contente d'être avec vous maintenant. Puis, je vous laisse avec en vidéo. J'ai trouvé plus facile pour moi, que mon anglais n'est pas très bien, mais je partage avec vous mon expérience avec les forces. Merci beaucoup. Olá, eu sou Elizabeth, sou enfermeira, sou professora, trabalho numa universidade pública no sul do Brasil, em Curitiba. E desde 2017 eu também acumulo um outro cargo dentro do complexo hospitalar como chefe da divisão de gestão de cuidados. Esse hospital, ele é público, é gratuito, ele é responsável tanto pela formação como também por pesquisas clínicas e, principalmente hoje, também pela assistência em nível terciário. Eu conheci o cuidado baseado nas forças por intermédio da doutora Judith Lapierre. Ela supervisionou uma aluna minha de doutorado em Quebec que trabalhou sobre as atividades e competências das enfermeiras de ligação. Oportunamente, conheci também a doutora Laurie Gottlieb em Montreal, e depois disso conheci a doutora Paula Encarnação e a doutora Cláudia, que fizeram a tradução do livro para o português de Portugal. De lá para cá, nós estabelecemos uma parceria muito profícua com os encontros, com eventos, com disciplinas e também algumas parcerias científicas. O SBCH, ele influenciou tanto a minha vida pessoal como a minha vida profissional no cotidiano da gestão de cuidados. E eu tinha planejado, me inspirado inclusive, para implementar de forma institucional o SBNH dentro do complexo hospitalar. No entanto, veio a pandemia e eu fiquei frustrada aí nas minhas expectativas. O cenário de pandemia, ele nos obrigou a buscar algumas opções. Foi um exercício que eu fiz com a minha equipe no sentido de usar as forças como estratégia gerencial. Os pressupostos que eu usei como uma estratégia gerencial, principalmente agora nesse tempo de pandemia, no início foi realmente uma situação muito desafiadora, que os problemas eles podem assumir uma dimensão muito maior, que nos impede de ver o contexto e as forças. E às vezes nós ficamos tão focados nesses problemas que nós ficamos cegos, e não reparamos o que está em bom funcionamento. As forças, elas podem ser, então, os combustíveis para as pessoas tomarem o protagonismo da situação, foi o que nós fizemos, né, e encontrar soluções para os problemas, lidar com situações complicadas e também ultrapassar essas vulnerabilidades. Dessa maneira, nós usamos, então, o SBCH como uma estratégia gerencial. O que nós fizemos, eu com a minha equipe? Então, nós consideramos quais eram as forças do hospital e chegamos à conclusão que nós tínhamos um bom parque tecnológico, que nós tínhamos expertise profissional, tínhamos um histórico de inovação e de humanização do cuidado e já trabalhávamos com pacientes complexos. Então, o hospital de nível terciário já trabalha com pacientes complexos. Também consideramos todo o nosso potencial, que era recurso financeiro, tínhamos uma boa situação financeira, apoio institucional, temos muitos médicos e enfermeiros, estão lotados em locais estratégicos, e temos também um serviço de gestão de alta e gestão de leitos que estavam consolidados. Então, esses serviços nos já ajudaram muito a superar algumas barreiras iniciais. Como déficit que nós poderíamos converter em forças, eu e a minha equipe, nós chegamos à conclusão que os dois principais déficits que nós tínhamos eram, o primeiro, a superespecialização dos nossos profissionais e também as diferentes profissões do hospital, que atuam no hospital na assistência, a dificuldade que elas tinham de sair dessa zona de conforto. Após 1 ano e meio de pandemia, nós tiramos algumas lições desse período, principalmente usando esses pressupostos do SBCNH. O primeiro, talvez o mais importante, seja que tempos difíceis são também oportunidades para aprendizagem. Descobrimos novas maneiras de cuidar, de colocar-se no lugar do outro. Também descobrimos que a gestão do cuidado, nessa época de pandemia, é um desafio até para as pessoas mais experientes, mas todos podem ajudar. Cada um pode fazer a sua parte. E mantemos sempre uma liderança pragmática e vigilante, que é ter sempre o foco, né? Nunca sair do foco, mas também não perder o time. Sempre ficar prestando atenção no contexto, na dinamicidade, que é as diferentes necessidades aqui dos profissionais e do próprio. Eu gostaria de agradecer e cumprimentar a doutora Laurie e toda a sua equipe por esse maravilhoso evento, por todo esse conhecimento compartilhado e pela oportunidade que nós temos, então, de apresentar a nossa experiência usando essa filosofia em todo o ensino, na pesquisa e também agora na gestão do cuidado. Eu gostaria de finalizar, então, com uma homenagem que foi feita para as enfermeiras por ocasião do Dia Internacional do Enfermeiro e no qual elas puderam expressar a sua vivência e a sua experiência durante a pandemia. Muito obrigada.
Foi preciso muita coragem. Então, eu acho que principalmente foi isso, foi buscar forças dentro de si e nos colegas, na instituição, para poder enfrentar essa pandemia com coragem. Eu acho que saímos muito maiores dessa pandemia do que antes por conta disso. Não sabíamos que éramos tão fortes.
Merci, Dr. Bernardino. Thank you, Dr. Bernardino. Our next panelist is Salex Espinoza Aliboga. Salex is a nurse by training, an educator by choice, and a lawyer by heart. He earned his degrees in nursing and Juris Doctor, magna cum laude, and a master's degree in nursing and law. He infuses nursing in legal practice before being appointed as Dean of Nursing in 2018. His innovation in his institution is the actualization of the virtual laboratory and classrooms through alumni funds. Salex is the president of the Association of Deans of Nursing in Region 6 and a member of the Regional Quality Assessment Team of the Commission on Higher Education in Region 6. He spends valuable time conducting researches in improving public health interventions. His interest focuses on HIV/AIDS, their impact, and the impact of assessment of health and environmental programs. During the challenging times of the pandemic, SALEX incorporated strengths-based nursing and healthcare in reaching out to COVID-19 frontliners by boosting their morale and dedication through webinars, provision of support services through donations, and financial assistance through alumni funds. To eliminate and radiate inspiration and motivation to these healthcare professionals, rendering dedicated services to COVID-19 patients in public and private hospitals in the city and the province of Iolo. Without further ado, I present SALEX.
Thank you, Annie, for the generous introduction. Pleasant day to everyone. Thank you for inviting me to share our experiences in the Philippines about strengths-based nursing by Dr. Gottlieb. I entitled my talk, Caring, Compassion, and Resiliency During Crises, the CCINAA and CPUCN Strength-Based Way. The historical perspective of the involvement of our university and the College of Nursing in particular is my August 2019 visit to our alumni chapter in Montreal, Canada. So this picture depicts the alumni who gathered to welcome us in a group of alumni who are very interested in funding initiatives of the College of Nursing. Through Magdalena Calceta's class 1961, she gave me a book on strengths-based nursing care by Dr. Laurie Gottlieb, and I was inspired and motivated to integrate strengths-based nursing and healthcare in our curriculum as well as in our community integration activities. SBNH has influenced me for 2 years, especially in my role as administrator in our college, in our organization. As an educator and leader, I focus on strengths and potential of my students, faculty, clients of our college, individuals, family groups, and community, and of course, the alumni, who are my great supporters and motivators to advance strengths-based nursing in our college. This influence has harnessed their potential in individual worth and capabilities and abilities to meet the demands and challenges in nursing and healthcare, especially during crises. SBNH has resonated me through this diagram that was developed by our faculty members, alumni, and students. The caring and resiliency as well as compassion of our alumni, students, and faculty are resonating and illuminating into developing the strengths potentials of our patients, clients, who are individual, family groups, and community. There are several changes in impact in our organization when I integrated strengths-based nursing and healthcare in our curriculum as well as in our initiatives. So we were inspired and motivated for the involvement of our students, faculty, and alumni. The care and compassion for students focusing on their inherent motivation to learn, particularly during the challenges of COVID-19 when we started our online teaching. So there is an active student and faculty engagement, feedbacking on how students and faculty cope based on their positive outlook about teaching and learning, even if it is delivered online, blended learning or flexible learning and not face-to-face. Open communication facilitated parents' involvement and engagement through counseling. And of course, self-reliance of adapted community through community development and service learning. And the strength of our alumni who are very supportive of the different programs in our college. There is a message from our alumni. So This is with regard to our initiative to boost the morale as well as the strength of our nurses. So this alumni was so overwhelmed with gratefulness and joy that they had to spill the beans of their initial conversation with the initiative. Another alumni who is very loyal and supportive to the university has initiated activities to donate funds to our partner hospital so that their morale as well as their dedication and diligence will be substantiated and will be strengthened through the support of the alumni. So there was an enormous response from our alumni all over the world in our different chapters in the USA, Canada, Middle East, in Asia, as well as our local alumni in the Philippines. I would like to cite one research study that we have conducted in 2019 with regard to workplace adversity and resilience among Filipino and Chinese staff nurses in selected private hospitals in the Philippines and China. Findings of the study revealed that despite workplace adversity, 2/3 of the respondents from the Philippines and 3/4 from China reported a high resiliency in dealing with the issues and concerns in their respective workplaces. Workplace adversity may be directly proportional to personal resiliency among Filipino and Chinese staff nurses. It means that as workplace situation becomes more adverse, the respondent become more resilient in dealing with them. This simply shows how strength-based nursing has influenced them in being resilient and pliant to all the challenges and not focusing on their weaknesses. On July 31, 2021, we will have an alumni homecoming and Loreto Dominado Tupas Memorial Lecture. Our theme in support of strengths-based nursing is caring and compassion beyond the pandemic, the CCINA strength-based way. These are some of the photo documentations on how we support our nurses to boost their morale and strength and their dedication during the pandemic. We have some food packs donated by our alumni all over the world. So see how the happy faces of the nurses when they receive this donation. This act will really boost the morale as well as the strengths of our nurses as they deliver quality nursing care with a difference. So our base hospital, Iloilo Mission Hospital, receives donation from the CCINAA. And faculty support students under licensure examination. We fought even if during the pandemic and there is limited resources and the restrictions imposed upon by quarantine measures, even if there are few faculty members are restricted to go to the testing site, they managed to cooperate and show their support to our student during the licensure examination. So we have released 100 balloons, to support our students during the nurse licensure examination. So faculty support students during the Philippine nurse licensure examination. And of course, one of our engagement in the community is about the self-reliance of our community, adopted community. So we have conducted a research study on the level of satisfaction, perceived beneficiality, and impact of community health nursing affiliation of Central Philippine University College of Nursing among residents of adopted community. Results revealed that 4 in every 5 of the residents claim that they are highly satisfied of the health-related activities conducted by the student nurses to their families and the community at large. Community health nursing exposures of CPU College of Nursing was perceived to be highly beneficial by 9 in every 10 of the residents of the adopted barangay. Community health nursing activities through community organizing and participatory action research and integration has developed the self-reliance of the residents and the families of the adopted barangay. This is evident by almost 3/5 of them who have their means of livelihood through self-sustaining projects such as backyard and herbal gardening and other income-generating projects. So these are photo documentation of our community outreach program participated by the faculty members and the students, and the produce of our adopted community through their backyard gardening. Okay, which we were able to strengthen self-reliance and building their strengths in doing backyard and herbal gardening, okay, as means of livelihood in other income-generating projects for that matter. So this community has been self-reliant, and that simply shows that we build on the strengths and how the people are going to find means for their living. We teach them how to fish, and they are going to fish for life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean Aliboga. Our next presentation is Professor Valérie Grenier. Valérie Grenier est maître d'enseignement et développement de projets cliniques et pédagogiques dans le domaine des soins infirmiers et interprofessionnels au sein de la Haute École de santé de Vaud à Lausanne, en Suisse. Son enseignement se centre sur la santé communautaire, les concepts et théories de soins infirmiers et la posture et l'organisation des soins. Son expertise s'articule par rapport à l'aide à la transformation des organisations de soins par l'utilisation d'une philosophie de soins pour guider la pratique clinique et articuler les modèles de collaboration. Sa vision en est une d'accompagnement qui est basée sur l'approche des soins fondés sur les forces, Strengths-Based Nursing and Healthcare, ainsi que le travail en équipe autogéré basé sur la recherche de solutions. Je vous cède, professeur Grenier.
Bonjour à tous, merci pour l'invitation. Donc aujourd'hui, je vais vous présenter mon action auprès de l'école, en fait, qu'on a accompagné ou en tout cas expérimenté dans les dernières semaines. Donc, c'est tout récent ce que je vais présenter aujourd'hui. Et puis, je voulais remercier d'ailleurs toutes les collègues qui ont travaillé sur cette transformation à l'école ou en tout cas cette expérimentation qui est en vue du prochain programme qui va amener aussi l'école à soutenir le nouveau programme sur la base de l'approche en soins fondés sur les forces. Donc, c'était vraiment une idée de projet pilote qui nous permettrait après de mieux imaginer le nouveau programme. Donc, voilà, je remercie beaucoup mes collègues parce qu'ils ont mis un effort formidable et puis le résultat est fascinant puisqu'on a eu les examens aujourd'hui. Et voilà, donc je vous titille un peu avant de commencer. Donc, comment j'ai connu... Next slide, please. Donc, comment j'ai connu l'approche en soins, donc le Strengths-Based Nursing and Healthcare. La première personne qui m'en a parlé, c'est une collègue qui est arrivée un jour avec ce livre et puis une conférence de Laurence Séchaud qui avait basé finalement son cadre théorique à l'aide de l'approche en soins fondée sur les forces, qui m'avait parlé beaucoup par rapport au fait que j'avais l'impression d'utiliser une certaine forme de cette approche. À la suite du livre, de la lecture de ce livre, j'ai eu la chance de pouvoir rencontrer Laurie suite à un contact mail qui m'a tout de suite reçu et on a pu discuter finalement d'un projet que j'avais de soins à domicile et d'organisation autogérée sur laquelle, en fait, je souhaitais que la philosophie puisse être utilisée autant auprès de la personne soignée que dans l'organisation de soins entre collègues. Ce projet n'a malheureusement pas vu le jour, mais il m'a donné beaucoup d'armes et beaucoup d'exercices pratiques sur différents aspects et m'a aidé à utiliser finalement les valeurs pour pouvoir me remettre en question et puis voir un petit peu comment je pouvais faire progresser et moi, mon approche et comment je pouvais travailler avec les gens. Donc, le moment le plus éclairant de toute cette expérience, c'est que parfois, les gens ne sont pas prêts à entendre ce qu'on a à dire et parfois, il faut travailler le fait qu'ils vont peut-être y arriver. Donc, au bout de 2 ans de recul suite à l'arrêt de ce projet, eh bien, les gens me recontactent pour en discuter. Donc, comme quoi, semer des graines, parfois, ça vaut la peine. Et puis, il faut être patient et ça apprend beaucoup l'humilité et puis le courage de garder la foi, la confiance au fait qu'à un moment donné, il y a des gens qui vont tout d'un coup associer les blocs et pouvoir avancer dans la démarche. Donc, je pense que autant en clinique auprès d'une personne soignée qu'auprès des collègues, auprès des organisations, auprès des gens qu'on rencontre dans la vie de tous les jours, eh bien ça peut permettre de donner confiance au fait que ce qu'on fait ou ce qu'on partage a toujours un impact et des fois, on n'en a pas toujours conscience. Et ça vient quand on ne s'y attend plus. OK, next slide. Pourquoi je me suis intéressée à l'approche en soins fondée sur les forces? Donc, la première chose, c'est l'aspect positif sur lequel, eh bien, je suis une personne de nature positive et puis j'avais besoin de me nourrir et d'avoir cet esprit qui était constructif, donc une spirale qui était plutôt, qui te porte et qui t'élève plutôt qu'une spirale qui te descend et qui focus sur uniquement ce qui ne fonctionne pas. Donc, l'aspect solution, mes travails solutions dans le partage était quelque chose de très, très important pour moi et dans ma collaboration avec les gens avec qui je travaille au quotidien. L'autre point essentiel, c'est le retour à l'essentiel, donc à l'aide des 4 piliers. Maintenant, moi, je les présente comme des filtres qui permettent de dire si notre intervention garde le focus où on veut être. Et puis, le fait d'être axé sur la cause du problème, ou en tout cas de travailler à la racine de où éventuellement pourrait se situer le problème, d'avoir une action qui est vraiment collaborative avec les personnes qu'on accompagne, de pouvoir leur laisser le choix, et puis le choix de se tromper, le choix d'essayer, le choix, mais en étant soutenu, et puis de pouvoir être centré sur une relation d'humain à humain. Ça, c'était vraiment les 4 éléments qui m'ont fait un peu pencher dans la balance d'utiliser cette approche. La globalité du regard, donc les 8 valeurs nous aident vraiment à cibler, si on veut, l'intention qu'on veut mettre dans ou le regard qu'on veut porter de manière plus spécifique sur un aspect de la personne ou, pour moi, des étudiants actuellement. Et puis, pour moi, c'est une approche qui est intuitive, donc qui demande de travailler plus que les 5 sens, mais travailler sur la base des 7 sens. Et puis, nous demande de rentrer en action, donc en expérimentation. Et puis, par l'expérimentation, on peut en faire quelque chose puisqu'on a un petit peu intégré corporellement, si on veut, ou en tout cas, on a des bases sur lesquelles on peut se repérer pour pouvoir avancer, ou en tout cas travailler différemment, et puis essayer autre chose. Donc, ça, c'était... Next slide. OK. Donc, j'ai appelé cette slide l'exemple d'influence. Donc, on a, avec l'équipe de première année, vraiment travaillé sur un projet d'immersion. Donc, c'est 1 semaine dans le cadre de la première année, donc en fin de première année, qui permet aux étudiants vraiment de s'extraire, si on veut, de leur quotidien. On les met en pleine nature, on les a mis en pleine nature. On leur a fait faire de la randonnée pédestre, du théâtre, du chant, du mindfulness, de la pleine conscience. On leur a fait faire du pilates, du qigong. Donc, il y avait 2 options. Donc, il y avait une option plutôt axée art de la scène, plutôt une option corporalité qu'on a appelée, où on était en concordance avec une action de pilates, saut pilates et de gyrokinésis, qui permettait en fait à l'étudiant de voir, oui, j'entends une consigne, mais est-ce que je suis capable de la mettre en place dans mon corps? Souvent non. qu'est-ce que ça m'apprend sur moi? Qu'est-ce que ça apprend aussi sur le fait que quand je donne ou que j'exprime quelque chose, c'est peut-être pas entendu, c'est peut-être pas compris, c'est peut-être pas acté. Donc, ça a apporté énormément d'éclairage aux étudiants. Et le fait d'être déconnecté, sans téléphone portable, sans train-train quotidien, et puis d'être au cœur de la forêt, leur a amené à ralentir leur rythme, à s'octroyer une pause à 3 semaines avant les examens, et puis à pouvoir apprécier finalement le moment et découvrir leurs collègues, puisque la COVID a fait que ils ne s'étaient pas rencontrés jusqu'à maintenant. C'était des petits étudiants de première année qui avaient travaillé majoritairement par Teams et qui n'avaient pas eu la chance de développer justement ces moments informels qui leur permettaient de pouvoir partager, pas comparer, mais de mettre à l'épreuve un petit peu ce qu'ils pensent, leurs connaissances, leurs compétences, et puis de pouvoir avancer. Donc, l'expérimentation a amené énormément de prise de conscience sur plusieurs points pour beaucoup d'étudiants. Ça nous a permis, nous, d'innover et eux de développer une créativité, puisque, marcher 1h30 dans le bois les pieds nus, qu'est-ce que ça fait? Ça met en évidence nos représentations, nos peurs, plein d'éléments qui fait en sorte que finalement, on devient peut-être un petit peu humble et que si on se retrouvait dans la même situation qu'un patient au milieu d'un lit d'hôpital, eh bien, il y a peut-être des peurs qui sont associées et comment je les accueille. Il y a aussi retrouver la source et les forces et les ressources. Donc, ça a mis en évidence plein de ressources qu'ils avaient et de capacités et de courage à outrepasser leur appréhension. Et puis, un pouvoir au fait que si on partage ce qu'on a peur, nos vulnérabilités, on est beaucoup plus fort après puisqu'on peut aller chercher des forces ou mettre en lumière certaines forces qui, au départ, étaient identifiées comme pas des forces et puis qui, finalement, peuvent être vues par quelqu'un d'autre comme une force. Donc, tout ce partage était vraiment fait un peu en vase clos, hein, et a donné des bons résultats puisque ils sont capables aujourd'hui de se positionner. Il y a eu un retour de la joie intérieure, une envie de se dépasser, un engagement plus fort et puis un alignement entre ce que je dis et ce que je fais. Et puis, là-dedans, sur la base, on a travaillé vraiment sur les habitudes de cœur et les habitudes d'esprit, comme Laurie aime bien les apporter, et puis sur les forces de respect, compassion, courage, pleine conscience, ouverture, acceptation et curiosité. Voilà, next slide. Alors, l'impact du changement depuis l'intégration de l'approche, et là, je vais parler plutôt par moi, mais aussi ce que je vois un peu à l'école maintenant que ça se transforme gentiment, eh bien, c'est que souvent, plutôt, en fait, j'ai plus peur. J'ai plus peur d'essayer, j'ai plus peur de me tromper. Et puis, j'apporte ça aussi dans la discussion. Les gens n'ont plus peur d'aborder quelque chose qui serait en tension. Quand il y a une résistance, je recherche plutôt un nouvel angle et puis comprendre d'où vient la résistance. Et puis, parce que je l'accueille, eh bien, ça va beaucoup plus, ça ouvre des perspectives et puis ça me permet d'outrepasser ou en tout cas de voir peut-être les éléments que je n'avais pas pris en compte et d'améliorer finalement ce que je fais. Je suis beaucoup plus calme. J'ai une observation qui est excessivement aiguë parce qu'à chaque fois, je passe les 8 valeurs et puis je filtre avec les 4 piliers. Mais surtout, je travaille à partir d'une intention. Je ne travaille plus à partir d'objectifs. Je travaille à partir d'une intention qui me permet d'apprécier le processus plutôt que le résultat. Parce que le résultat, je vais le prendre. En fait, je prends la personne, l'étudiant, les collègues, et puis je chemine avec eux. Et du coup, la pression partie me permet encore plus d'expérimenter et de proposer des trucs complètement fous. Enfin, mes collègues vous diront. Et parallèlement à ça, ce qui est super, c'est que j'ai beaucoup d'anciens étudiants qui gentiment commencent à poser beaucoup de questions, introduire ça dans la pratique. Donc, je voulais juste souligner pour terminer cette présentation que on a Sarah et Alessandro qui ont fait une formation en emploi, qui sont maintenant directeurs et infirmiers-chefs de l'échappée, qui travaillent sur la base de l'approche en soins fondés sur les forces avec une population d'accueil des gens en marge de la société. J'ai Vincent Beauvais et Marie Messillier qui travaillent dans un accueil pour personnes âgées, dans un home, à l'EMS Burier, qui ont vraiment fait un travail phénoménal avec toute l'équipe. Donc là, moi, je les accompagne pour ça aussi. Il y a ESAV qui a décidé de soutenir son programme sur l'approche en soins fondés sur les forces. Et là, je remercie vraiment mes collègues de toute la démarche qu'ils ont faite pour pouvoir discuter des valeurs et puis pouvoir voir qu'est-ce qui pouvait convenir et soutenir finalement leur démarche d'éducation. Et puis la VASAM, donc la section de la petite enfance qui travaille depuis plusieurs années avec Gora Darocha dans l'utilisation et la transformation de leurs pratiques sur la base de l'approche. Voilà, donc ça, c'est les petits éclairages en Suisse. Alors, je vous remercie beaucoup. C'était vraiment un honneur d'être avec vous. Et puis, ben, voilà. À bientôt.
Merci beaucoup, professeur Grenier. Pour notre dernière présentation, je vais vous introduire Dr. Judith Lapierre. Dr. Judith Lapierre is a community health nurse and professor of nursing science. She holds a PhD in public health with a specialization in health promotion, and she developed research, teaching, and clinical interests around issues of equity, social justice, and healthy environments. Focusing on structural influencers of health like housing and advanced professional practice in prevention, she developed a unique community clinic with several projects in context of cultural diversity and First Nations communities. Her recent interests have included telehealth, peer and community support practices, and actively defending nursing's role in universal screening of women's victims of partner violence. Dr. Lapierre.
Bonjour. It's a real privilege to be sharing our experience today. Thank you to Dr. Gottlieb and the two nursing associations and Canadian Academy, and warm welcome to my colleagues and friends and new colleagues from Vietnam, for example. I'm going to be talking about Mimosa du Quartier, which is a community housing project for single mothers operating since 2015 as a Habitat Santé, because it has a great focus on health. It serves 21 families of a diversity of culture and over 25 children. We have a unique nursing community center that offers community support practices and preventative health services. Next slide. My involvement and engagement with SBNH can be traced back to 8 critical points that I can divide into just 4 phases. First is my coup de foudre, or love at first sight, that is lasting for so many years. I was introduced to the approach by a seminar given by McGill, and then I introduced it to my course that I teach at the undergraduate level. The second phase was like a mirror where I recognized, in fact, the essence of nursing. It was a reconnaissance for me. So as was mentioned before, it is something that we all value and know about nursing, but this is really giving us the real picture of nursing and how it should be. The third phase was a root for me, like deepening my understanding, and it came about with earlier meetings with Dr. Gottlieb and Dr. Bernardino in Montreal, and also with my research program where I try to involve and engage the SBNH approach, especially during my sabbatical that was planned with Brazil and with Montreal, McGill, Ingram Nursing School right now. The last phase is the new me with the new eyes that should focus on some positive aspects, and my new ears with SBNH becoming my own nursing home. I'm getting older, so SBNH is really family to me, and it is my shelter. It is, I guess, the embodiment that Dr. Gottlieb was talking about, and this is coming into practice within the diversity of my projects and clinical and teaching. Next slide, please. What I found most attractive, what caught my eye and attention from the beginning was its pragmatism. Although it is a philosophy, it has given me so many tools and priorities to focus on, like, for example, getting to know the person and the family. It changed the nursing process for me by focusing it on that special knowledge of the person at the first initial step. So it was really a new focus for me. Like we know it, but sometimes we don't have time to do all that. But in that process, we must focus on knowing the person, its context. And the second thing that attracted me was, of course, its principles and values of shared power, solidarity, accompaniment of the person, and the whole issue of the relevance of the timing of our intervention and strategies. Lastly, of course, I appreciate very much the 8 strategies that are teaching us how to find the strengths in the families and the communities. Next slide, please. SBNH informs my work in several aspects. It can be at the Mimosa, for example, in our evaluation and assessment of the families. In our nursing intervention, we moved from a model of intervention to a model of accompaniment, which is more empowering. We, in our individual plan for the families, in management, we use an SBNH lens to make decisions, to share responsibilities in the community center. It's been a real changing management style using SBNH as well. And we used it as well in our innovation and new services. For example, we're planning a new swapping program where parents will share their own strengths on a list, and then we'll have a program about whoever in the housing is an excellent, I don't know, writer or good for certain skills. They will be sharing those strengths and expertise among each other. So creating a solidarity, social filet sécurité. Then lastly, of course, in our placements with students, we share and value the SBNH approach with the students. Next slide, please. One example that I can think about that still come to my mind very often is a few years ago, there was a mother, she was at risk of being expulsed from the housing community program by the council administration of the housing. And I was to be showing to court for that matter. And I was preparing because I'm the director of the housing community program. So I was supposed to execute the decision from the administration council because of several reasons, for example, non-payment of the housing rent, and also several breaches of our collective code of life. But 2 days before the audience, I started thinking about SBNH and how I should be reacting. And it was really a shock to me to say I was going to go in front of a judge to do that with a family. So I met with the mother and we came up with an agreement together. And on the day of the court audience, we went to the judge together and we said to him, we want to abandon the process and here's our agreement. Please acknowledge this new agreement. And he said he was totally surprised that never happened to him before, but he did give his full agreement to this new agreement. And of course, this changed the lives of the children, for example, of that family. So it is supporting better housing stability and equity, as was mentioned before. And if every action and decision are made with an SBNH lens, we're supporting resiliency and power to the mothers. And it makes for better futures for children. It nourishes caring relationships. And for me, the approach is a strong social justice tool, not only theoretically, but with very powerful pragmatism. And I'm very grateful for Dr. Gottlieb for our several discussions and meetings, and it's still influencing my work in every day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lapierre. Thank you to all the panelists for sharing such wonderful stories of your innovations of strengths-based nursing and healthcare in your respective settings and in your countries. The next part of our program will be the Q&A session. So for the next 40 minutes, we will divide the Q&A session in two parts. For the first 20 minutes until 1:25, we will have a Q&A for our panelists. I would ask all participants to put and post their questions in the Q&A section. So at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see an icon, Q&A, and that is where we would want you to post your questions. Pour la prochaine partie de notre plénière, nous allons avoir une période de questions et réponses. Pour les premiers 20 minutes, nous allons demander des questions à nos panélistes. Et à la deuxième section, nous allons demander à Dr. Gottlieb. Alors, si vous avez des questions, s'il vous plaît, postez-les dans l'icône Q&A et nous allons commencer nos périodes de questions avec nos panélistes. So for all of the panelists, while we start having our participants putting in questions, perhaps we can start with a more general question. In terms of, with the projects that you have presented, what do you see as some of the important next steps of strengths-based nursing and healthcare, respective to the work that you have done?
So Alex is indicating Annie.
Okay, sorry, absolutely. So Dean Aliboga,
Yeah,
by all means, yes.
Thank you. Future directions for us is building more resilient communities anchored on strength-based nursing. Thank you.
I'm looking at the other panelists. Judith?
In our community-based center, we've decided to focus in the next few months with learning how to integrate the intersectionality approach to SBNH and the trauma-informed approach, because we think that they are so closely related and they could help us in our work with the families from a diversity of cultures and with several types of different oppressions and experiences.
Thank you. Dr. Bernardino? I was wondering if Dr. Bernardino, vous vouliez répondre aux prochaines étapes dans les démarches de vos travaux?
C'est la question, c'est sur le time, c'est ça?
Sur les prochaines, comment vous entrevoyez les prochaines étapes du travail que vous faites avec l'approche fondée sur les forces dans les innovations que vous avez faites jusqu'à date?
Mais j'ai une question là
oui,
sur le time.
Oui, okay, oui, d'accord. Oui, est-ce que vous voulez répondre? Alors, la question, je vais le dire pour... c'est you spoke about never losing your timing for nursing leaders with the pandemic. Alors, peut-être élaborer.
Oui, j'ai compris. Donc, le time, c'est juste de faire bien attention au contexte, c'est ça. C'est parce que c'est juste d'intervenir quand la situation exige. C'est pas penser trop, penser trop. C'est juste de savoir, de répondre aux besoins au moment donné, c'est ça, pas laisser faire, par exemple. C'est juste aussi regarder bien le contexte, puis c'est juste de répondre aux besoins en même temps. C'est pas de laisser passer. C'est juste, c'est ça ce que j'ai dit, le timing. Alors, on fait bien attention à nos professionnels, puis à nos patients et comment on peut faire les démarches pour répondre aux besoins, c'est ça.
Merci. Il y a une autre question. Alors, cette question s'adresse à Valérie. Quelle était la durée de votre programme auprès des étudiants et combien environ ont participé?
Alors, le projet d'immersion faisait partie d'un grand module appelé Intégration chez nous et qui regroupe tous les aspects de réflexivité autour d'un bilan des compétences à l'aide de l'alternance intégrative, donc le processus de comment partir en stage et puis revenir de stage et puis bonifier ou potentialiser ce qui a été vécu en stage. Et associé à toute cette progression, il a été créé une semaine. Donc, on les gardait une semaine donc 5 jours. Au départ, c'était 24 heures sur 24, mais bon, avec la COVID, on a dû réajuster, mais on les gardait quand même de 8 heures à 17 heures ou à 21 heures le soir, donc ils n'avaient pas grand-chose à faire entre deux, ils étaient trop claqués. Et puis, il y a eu toute la volée de première année, donc c'est environ 130 étudiants, divisés en 4 semaines, voilà. Donc, ils étaient à peu près 45 par semaine, divisés en 2 options. Voilà.
Bravo. Alors, je vais essayer I will try to synthesize several questions in the Q&A with respect to the implementation of the approach. So one of our participants, and I think that this could be addressed to all of our panelists, how could we start to implement this concept in our workplace? And along these lines, when we are looking at implementing it in our workplace, what have been some particular benefits or challenges with the implementation of evidence-based practices in settings when we are applying a strengths-based nursing and healthcare approach? So I leave it open to the panelists.
Je peux peut-être prendre la parole au départ. Donc, à l'EMS où j'aide en ce moment la transformation avec l'utilisation de l'approche, ce qui a été le plus travaillé, c'est toute la notion de peur d'entrer en action et quels étaient les blocages. Donc, il y a eu toute une base j'aime pas ça appeler théorie parce qu'on a travaillé chaque valeur de manière à essayer d'expérimenter la valeur pour soi et dans la pratique. La chose qui est le plus challengeant, si on veut, au niveau ici en Suisse, c'est qu'on a une diversité de cultures dans les soins parce que les soignants sont vraiment formés en France, au Portugal, en Espagne, en Suisse. Et puis, les approches théoriques de base où la vision des soins est vraiment différente. Et puis, se rassembler déjà est un challenge. Et, par contre, une fois que c'est fait, eh bien, c'est comment ils vont prendre la position de leader pour coacher parce que là, dans les aspects de home, ou d'établissements médico-sociaux, bien, on voit qu'il y a un pourcentage d'infirmières qui est très, très faible et qui doivent finalement mener la barque pour l'ensemble de l'équipe ou en tout cas guider et leader ça. Donc, c'était qu'ils aient confiance d'essayer et de se mettre en mouvement et de faire à petits pas. J'appelle cela le processus des petits pas. Voilà, c'était le petit truc.
Thank you, Professor Grenier. Any other, Dean Aliboga, did you want to?
Yeah, one challenge in implementing strengths-based nursing in evidence-based practice is about the traditional approach, wherein some of the nurses capitalize on deficit-based nursing. So it encourages passivity rather than active participation of the patient, focusing on their strengths. So there are some who shared their lived experience that they found it difficult if the patient are still focusing on their weaknesses rather than their strengths. So there are some qualitative studies that says that some of the experiences of the nurses, even if they try to pursue capitalizing on strength-based nursing, they encountered obstacles, especially when the patients are not really educated about focusing on their strengths and potentials. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question for you, Dean Aliboga. In terms of your faculty, what is resonating with them with the strengths-based nursing and healthcare approach? What was attractive to them in this approach, in integrating it in their teaching, their clinical practice, and in terms of the initiatives that you are doing in your country that really are about creating strong communities of practice through coaching, mentorship, and accompaniment?
Yeah, most of our faculty members are really focusing on the potential of our students. That's why our admission and retention policies, we have psychological testing to focus on the psychological strengths of our students. We have nursing aptitude competency assessment. In our nursing curriculum, we also have competency appraisal, wherein students' strengths in particular field of nursing, like operating room and delivery room, they are being measured, and we do tightening and strengthening of the competencies at the end of the term. We do one-on-one competency assessment, and if the student fell short of the required competencies by the Bachelor of Science in Nursing curriculum, our faculty members are doing one-on-one mentoring until this particular competency is being mastered. But of course, we have a baseline data of how our students are prepared, to enter into the BSN curriculum. And that will be our basis. We further strengthen their strengths in the area where we can discover during the psychological exams and the nursing aptitude test, use as a basis. And then later on, we have a follow-up every year until they graduate, when they are about to master the competencies needed. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is for Dr. Lapierre. Perhaps you could give us another example of your experience with strengths-based nursing and healthcare in the context of the work that you do.
Well, I can think about a program that was funded by the Social Science and Research Council with Burkina Faso. Our partners could not be here today, but we will share tools that were developed. We trained over 100 midwives in Burkina Faso, nurses and doctors on the approach. And we've developed videos supporting their clinical skills in relation to integrating SBNH into their initial nursing intervention assessment, and especially for Burkina Faso, it was related to perinatal health and also to malaria prevention. So we have 2 videos that are available, and we're pursuing the development of tools with a community of practice for those midwives and nurses in West Africa.
Thank you. That's a very, very exciting work. We have a question from one of our participants who would like to teach strengths-based nursing and healthcare and teach according to some of the categories, such as how to teach for strengths of mindset, strengths of knowledge and knowing, strengths of relationship, and strengths of advocacy. And I wonder if our panelists could perhaps share some of the ways and some of their strategies in bringing this important aspect of strengths-based nursing and healthcare to students, researchers, educators in their respective settings. Laurie? You're muted, Laurie.
I know that's a really excellent question, because we say that SBNH is founded on those 4 foundations of person-centered, empowerment, innate capacities, and relationships, and it is operationalized in those 8 values. But to be able to do that, we need to develop certain qualities in the nurse. And what the person is referring to is, I think it was my chapter 5, in which I outlined strengths of mindset and strengths of advocacy. You'll have to remind me, strengths of relationships, and then I've broken it down to the different types of strengths under each of those. If they go to that chapter, there are many different strategies that I have suggested to develop. Like, how do you develop humility? How do you develop open-mindedness? How do you develop a non-judgmental attitude? How do you develop advocacy? And so I think there are many, I've identified the strengths that are related to these categories. And I've given some suggestions on how one goes about developing each of them. So I think the important thing is to break down what is the quality you want to focus in on. Once you identify the quality you want to focus in on, there are many different ways one could develop the qualities. For example, curiosity. There's a lot of work done on how some people are naturally curious. They come with this orientation that they have learned within their own families or within their own educational process, in terms of where they are encouraged to ask questions, to extend their ideas. But there are some programs that do not really foster curiosity. So the question is, what are the different ways we as educators can foster curiosity within our classroom setting? To what extent we create climates that really encourage people to explore, to extend ideas, to think of another question, and so I think we have to look at what we're doing both within our classroom and then give our students the tools to really expand that quality. So I think it's really going quality by quality. As I said, there's curiosity, there's advocacy. In advocacies, there's self-efficacy. There's a lot of suggestions on how you develop self-efficacy, because you have to have self-efficacy in order to be an effective advocate. And so if you break down the qualities and which quality you're trying to develop, then it doesn't become so overwhelming. And then you say, okay, here's the quality. The quality in this case, we just talked about curiosity, or we've talked about humility. Humility is the opposite of arrogance. Humility is being truly present in a situation, being able to develop one's listening skills, not what you think the person wants, what you want the person to say, not what you expect, but to what extent you're fully present in that situation and you are listening. There are many different tools and techniques on how you develop those particular qualities. So I would say, figure out what are the qualities you want to develop. There's a lot of qualities. Identify which you think are the most critical and focus on those, both in terms of the type of educational experience you give to your students, and then as they go into the clinical area, have them record what they are doing and what they are saying, and process recordings with patients and families or with other colleagues. They could be practicing, and then see how do you extend and develop specifically those skills. Now, that's an excellent question, because we always say nurses should be non-judgmental, nurses should be curious, nurses should be open. But the question is, how are we deliberately and intentionally targeting those specific behaviors in how we structure learning experiences, and how we then follow up when the students are in the clinical areas, and to what extent we're noticing what they're doing, we're identifying teachable moments, we're role modeling, and we are deliberately helping to develop those qualities. If you try to develop all the qualities, you get overwhelmed. If you take one or two per, and you build on them, you will see, you'll begin to see a difference. But it's an excellent question. It's really that chapter, I believe it's chapter 5. Can I just answer Salik's question, which always intrigued me? Can I take, is there another question? Because I would like to answer that question, because that's one of the most common questions. Patients want to talk about their problems, their deficits, what's upsetting them, and nurses want to shift the conversation to focusing on their strengths. And I would say that is in some ways a misunderstanding of what strengths-based nursing is. We always begin, one of the principles that we look at is always to begin where the patient is at. If the patient wants to talk about their problems and their challenges and what is upsetting them, that's where you begin. And it's in the course of listening to their understanding of their problems and their things that are upsetting them. You begin where they are at and you listen to them that very carefully, and then you can go through the value wheel. So, and in the questioning of the patient, so tell me, if somebody's telling them about their problem, tell me what is specific about this situation that you're really bothering you, and you get to uniqueness. So tell me how this situation is affecting other areas of your life. That's, that's the holism and that interconnectedness. Tell me about how you're understanding or interpreting. And in the course of going through the value wheel and asking questions around that particular concern that the patient is experiencing and talking about, you're beginning to hear how they understand their situation. You're beginning to identify what it is that's working for them. You could say, tell me what's working for you, what's not working with you. You don't have to talk about strengths directly. You just have to listen carefully, notice, and say, okay, so tell me about, so you mentioned X, Y, and Z. So what is working in this situation? How can you really capitalize on what is working in the situation in order to contain or lessen the problems that you're dealing with? Is there something working? So it's really always begin where the patient is at, what the patient wants to talk about. You don't have to shift to strengths, because if you shift to strengths, then you're not really listening to the patient. And it's really being attuned to what the patient is saying. And once you're attuning to it and then asking specific questions that are guided by the value wheel, you're going to get a more complete understanding of their situation, who they are, how they've come to that situation. Because remember, the solutions to their problems reside within them. They might not recognize that, but that's what it is when nurses create those conditions to enable that to come forward. So it's not, because originally in the McGill model was strengths versus deficit. I said, no, it's strengths that you understand and discover in order to really get a complete and comprehensive understanding, and that you can then leverage and help the patient begin to see the situation or deal with the situation in a different way. Like one of them is, patients often talk about fatigue. Where do you go say, no, you're not tired? Of course they're tired. So you say to them, tell me about this tiredness. Is it something, and you go through, is this tiredness? And have you ever had this experience of tiredness? What have you tried to do to deal with this tiredness? That's, self-determination. Are there things in, that help or that don't help? Anyways, so you go through that, and then you get a more complete understanding. And that's why curiosity is so important. That's why the quality of curiosity and being open to and being attuned to people that is so curious. SBNH is a package deal. So I hope that, helps to clarify that a bit. But with that question comes up so often. And so I think to myself, that is such a common question and such a common way of approaching that people try to shift the conversation. And when you shift the conversation and the patient doesn't want to shift the conversation, what you do is you turn them off. You want to open, and that's the openness. You want to keep the conversation open and fluid, and really you want to be curious.
Thank you, Laurie. The next part of our discussion Q&A will be with Dr. Gottlieb. So if you have any specific questions, please, I invite you to put it in the Q&A icon tab. We do have a first question, Dr. Gottlieb, that comes from one of our participants who asks and thanks you for the very insightful presentation and inspiring one, and would like for you perhaps to elaborate on how SBNH can name and address issues of structural racism that make it difficult for individual practitioners to provide racially and culturally responsive nursing care to a growing population of Canadians.
Wow, that's really a huge question. But just before I get to that question, and I would like my other two colleagues, but I want to thank Valerie and Judith and Selex and Lindsay and Elizabeth for your really wonderful presentations. I'm truly moved by them, and I'm truly moved by the imagination and the creativity and the commitment to this approach. So I need to tell you that you have touched me to the very depth of my soul, and I truly believe that, you know, I identified the early adopters and the early champions, and you know, you're counted amongst them, because it's going to take a community of committed people to really transform the healthcare systems that we all have identified what the problems are worldwide. So thank you so much. And I just want to say that to you, my really profound gratitude and appreciation. In terms of the question that is now being asked in terms of how SBNH can address issues of racism and culture, and I mean, it's a huge question. And I know in our grant, could I bring forth Melanie and Pam to join me on this, because, and I want to introduce them, and I think we will begin with a discussion on that. So I've asked Melanie, my friend Melanie, and Pam, let me introduce you to Dr. Lavoie Tremblay-Mel and my wonderful friend Pam, my both wonderful friends. Let me introduce them to you. Why I have asked them to be with me and present, because I knew we would get some very deep answers that are way beyond what I can answer, and they come in with different perspectives. Mel and Pam are both co-investigators on the grant. Mel has a role, and they both occupy very, very important roles on the grant, and together we're moving this grant forward and this project forward. Mel is on the executive, and with Tina and Bruce responsible for the day-to-day management of the many issues that come up. But Mel is also heading the evaluation of this of the leadership training program. And Pam, as I said, has been my twin on this, my clinical twin, my clinical partner. Remember, I'm a twin, so I always think in terms of twinship. And she's been my clinical partner way before even the grant got started. And Pam has been the co-chair and working with me on the actual bringing the training program with its three components: story sharing, mentorship, and the modules into a reality. And you know, together, I just feel so blessed to have these very and incredibly committed and true partners in every sense of the word. So in response to that question, you know, it's a very complex question. No one really has, and I've been doing a lot of reading about it because of the complexity of the issue of systemic racism. But if you begin with the value wheel, you begin to understand how that person is experiencing. It's all about what people's stories are and how they experience this situation. And it begins with sitting down and listening to people's stories, and if you go through that value wheel, and the foundation, and and the foundations, you begin to understand, so tell me about your story. And it's always in the story and what their experience is that you begin to understand. It always begins, if we're going to talk about systemic racism, we have to begin at all levels. It's not beginning at one level, but it begins with individuals, and then it moves to a community and then a societal level. But we begin at individual levels to truly understand. People want to tell their story. They want to be heard. They want to be understood in terms of what their experiences have been like. In this project, we have EDI, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, as one of the major components and threads. And we are working with one of the co-investigators is Dr. Kimberly Manning, who is she's the director of the institute, the Simone de Beauvoir Institute. And she and two of her other colleagues are working with each of our faculty. I didn't get to present this, but the training program is made up of 12 modules divided into 3 segments, and we have 24 faculty members working, 2 faculty members per module, and she is working with each of those faculty members to sensitize them to how to integrate and to raise awareness of the EDI issues, because it begins with, first of all, self-awareness of where I stand, where are my biases, and then raising awareness of what are the issues that are not our stories, it's somebody else's stories. Pam, maybe you'd like to elaborate on that and try to answer the question.
Well, thanks, Laurie. I think it is a really important and timely question. I think you've answered it in a really terrific way. I would just add that I believe that bringing the strengths-based nursing and healthcare lens and approach to situations, as Laurie says, it truly taps in and it calls out the way of being of the individual. So the way of being as it relates to being very mindful, being curious, being humble, those are important qualities in the context of racism and structural racism, because they open the doors for us individually to be learners and to be on a journey to understand more, understand historical context, understand things that we have been unaware of as individuals, and then begin to incorporate those into our way of being and into our practices. So I think by virtue of the approach being a value-based approach, we have the 8 values that really are explicit values that if you begin to use them, label them, understand how they show up in your activity and your relationships and engagements, then you're at least bringing that conscious effort to those interactions, which gives the opportunity also for individuals who want to examine their unconscious biases. And that's a really important part of moving ahead in this context of racism and structural racism to make change. So again, agreeing with Laurie, we have to engage at the individual, the organizational, and the broader systems levels to really see significant changes. And I think we all have a part to play. So that's a really important part of being a strengths-based nurse, strengths-based health provider and educator or leader, is that actually you are engaging in your own learning, engaging in conversation, and seeking ways to do better. And I think leaders then, through a strengths-based lens, are in a position to actually make some of those structural changes. We can look at what are our hiring practices, what are the ways that we support individuals in situations where there is conflict, and sometimes in nursing, very outright conflict between patient and nurse around who they want as a caregiver, who the patient wants as a caregiver, or who the caregiver wants to care for. So there are many, many conversations that can be held that obviously are very sensitive, but important. And I think as a strengths-based healthcare leader, we don't want to shy away from those. We want to engage in them, and we want to have sort of deep, reflective conversations at multiple levels so that we can truly begin to better understand and change the systems. And the last thing I'll just say is I think that the whole notion of the approach is about humanizing healthcare. So humanizing healthcare to me means we are really understanding the human experience. And to Laurie's point, if we're really attuned and we're listening, we're really trying to hear, perhaps with more open ears in a different way than we might have in the past, what the concerns are of the patient or the client that we're working with, and really understand those so that we can be partners, we can be advocates, and we can seek to support these changes. So big question. Thank you for asking. And
it is a big question. And if we go back to Christina Rosmus's story that I told, we all come with our biases and we're very quick to label rather than to look and see the humanity of the person and who that person is and the pain they're in. So, you know, I know we've been, you know, I know personally I've been doing a lot of reading and studying and sensitizing me to some of those issues. But as a society, we have a long way to go. I was listening to somebody who said, look how far we have come in a very short period of time. Mike, I think it was on our one of our calls that somebody said 2 years ago they couldn't have even raised these issues, and now we're having a conversation about these issues. So that to me is a measure of progress. So Mel or Mike, is there anything you can add, or is there another, or should we go on to the next? I hope we've been able to at least begin to address. So in other words, we don't know the answer, but it really begins with one's attitude and stance and openness to learning.
Mike, did you want to interject?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We do have another question, Laurie, with respect to, and I shout out also to Pam and Melanie. And as we continue respectively our journeys in clinical practice with strengths-based nursing and healthcare, which requires time to spend with patients and families, time that we do not have enough of when there are shortages of staff, and where, you know, we need to concentrate on tasks that must be completed. So I guess is, how do we continue, or if we haven't initiated this type of work in complex and chaotic environments of care?
That is also a very an objection or a frequently asked questions I have heard. And in some ways it's a misconception, because as we're doing our tasks, my friend Pam has often said, it's how you show up, and it's how you show up to do the task. And just recently, one of our colleagues' husband was hospitalized, and he said, I had a strengths-based nurse. And it was in the way she showed up and the way she, had to carry out her tasks. But how she engaged him really made the difference. So, they say it's not enough time, but it really doesn't take very much time. Bruce could tell you, I could be in a taxi and in 5 minutes I could get anyone's life story. It's because of the way you're open, the way you're asking questions, the way you're thinking, and the way you engage somebody. And SBNH is about engagement. It's about how you are open and form a relationship. And it doesn't take time. You don't sit down and you don't have to go through the whole value wheel. You begin a conversation, and it's in the conversation, and it's acknowledging the person, who they are and what they're going through, that you really begin. It doesn't have to be, done all at one time. It's a slow engagement and a getting to know the person and as we said, not what's the matter with you, but also what matters to you. But I have heard that a lot. And I think it's the difference between, when I talked about the difference between to be and to have. To have means you apply an idea. My son was the one who introduced me to this idea of, Eric Fromm. To be is an integral part of who you are and how you just show up and how you begin to interact. It becomes just almost automatic. And it's when you sit back and start thinking, well, what did I do? How did I do it? What else could I have done? And that's the important parts of reflection. But it becomes who you are and how you decide to be in a particular situation.
Thank you, Laurie. Pam or Melanie, did you want to add anything?
Well, thanks, Annie. I think Laurie's provided an excellent comprehensive answer. I do know, working in the hospital system, these pressures are very real for our nursing teams, and in particular over the last year and a half, as we know, nurses have really stepped up to deliver care in new and different ways, be redeployed in some cases, and have had to really figure out how to be oriented in a way to care for their patients that appreciates them as individuals, while really managing with so many new protocols, lots of changes, and just the general COVID chaos. But I've also been so impressed that so many nurses have actually been able to keep front and center what's really important. What is really important is the patient, who they are, what they need right now, how communication can be enhanced, how they can be maintained in connection with their family and their loved ones, despite restrictions and all of those things. So I think, going back to the very beginning of Laurie's talk, there are many nurses who function in this way of a strengths-based orientation, who maybe don't fully realize that or know that, because we don't talk about it in that language. And my one tip in addition would be, I think adopting this orientation or practice gives actually language now to nurses to be able to articulate and advocate for patient needs, for patient care interactions, and for encounters that take into the equation the importance of that person-centered, relational, empowering conversation. And just even doing that can actually be helpful in focusing other people on the team and pushing the leadership of the team to understand what is nursing all about and why is it so important that nurses actually are attending to the whole patient, in addition to completing the task in an efficient and timely manner.
It's very interesting. I've been collecting stories. I told you I'm a nurse consultant at the CIUSSS-Centre Ouest, and one of the projects we are doing is collecting stories from nurses about what this experience has been like. And one nurse, they've been fabulous. In some ways, I've just been humbled by listening to them and what they have gone through. And in some ways, rediscovering why they committed and chose a career in nursing, and how they talk about the positive aspects of COVID in terms of rediscovering who they are and what gives their lives meaning and purpose. But one nurse told me that this need to partner with families, so it has been so critical. And she found that if she takes 5 minutes at the beginning of her shift to call the family, to tell them what's going on, then she saves oodles amount of time. At a different time, the family's not calling them, they're not bothering them. It's really the way you partner in a very different in a very different way, and so it could be very time saving in the long run.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you to all the panelists who are still with us. This brings us to the end of the question and answer period. There were great questions, and we hope that we were able to address some of the things that you were questioning yourselves about. So in this last section of our time together, I will pass the baton to Dr. Bruce Gottlieb, who will provide a wrap-up of our session for today.
Thank you very much, Annie. And what I'm actually going to do, as you can see in the slide, is do something I think which is extremely important, and that's the question. We've had a wonderful beginning today. I think the concept of this checkup and the idea of creating communities of practice, the proof is in the pudding, as they say. So many people have joined up, participated. This is wonderful. And what we would like to do now is plot our way forward and tell you about some of the things that we plan to do in the future in order to essentially grow our communities of practice, in particular, continue to develop strength-based nursing and healthcare around the world. And the first thing I'd like to remind you, and you'll see that, is that there are two surveys, post-event evaluation surveys, one in English and one in French. Please fill them out. This will be very helpful to us when we plan for future meetings, which we are. And in fact, the future opportunities will include further presentations, other panel discussions, and in fact, any suggestions that you might have on how we can help you in your community with regards to strength-based nursing and healthcare. That would be very, very valuable to us. To start off with, we are planning a biannual newsletter which will go around to communities, strength-based nursing and healthcare communities around the world. If you would like to add anything from your community on these to these newsletters, then you can always send that information to us. And of course, we will be pleased to send it around. And the other thing that we should note is, and in fact, this is in every situation, we've been talking about strengths, there is a way of looking at strengths. Now, clearly, we've been living through a very, very difficult situation with the COVID pandemic at the moment. But one of the strengths that has been revealed by the COVID pandemic, at least indirectly, has been the tremendous explosion in the ability to communicate remotely. And in fact, this checkup itself is an example of this. And the truth of the matter is that, as we said, in every situation you can look for strengths. This is one of the advantages. And one of the things that has now happened is that the leadership training course, which is one of the centerpieces of our present grant, is now being developed to be remote. And this will give us huge opportunities whereby there are possibilities of these courses now being available all over the world. And that also includes to any future courses that we might be developing in strength-based nursing, such as clinical courses as well. And so therefore there are these opportunities. Again, if you have any suggestions, please feel free to contact us, and we will be only too pleased to follow up. If I could go to the next slide, please. Next slide, I don't know. Okay, thank you. Okay, just a couple of resources available for you. There is the SBNH project website. There is also a website which lists the various different publications available on SBNH. I would like to also point out that there is information on the Canadian Nurses Association website, and also point out the website of the Canadian Academy of Nurses. And just one other thing, which was mentioned by Judith Lapierre, but I think is like very significant in some ways. And these are the training videos and accompanying presentations from Burkina Faso. They really are very, very creative. Might I suggest that everyone looks them up, because they certainly can give plenty of future ideas for for any of the possible projects that you might have. So I don't think that we should bear that in mind. And it's also, I think, an example of even places and with, if you might say, limited resources can really, really create a very imaginative and innovative types of programs. And finally, if I could go to the next slide, just like to thank our presenters again, who are listed here, and particularly the event organizers. And I would like to point out, and I'm going to mention them, Alicia Sumani, who is the project coordinator of the Canadian Nursing Association, Joanna Todi, who is the Knowledge Mobilization Outreach Consultant, Anna Adjuman, who is the project administrator, who is one of the major organizers of this program today, Tina Gelsomini, our invaluable project officer in all ways. And finally, a special shout out to Judith Lapierre for her outreach, translation of some of the documents. She really has brought strength-based nursing to many places in the world that would never have been exposed to it before. And finally, might I just add a special thanks, I didn't write, is to my colleague on the Knowledge Mobilization Committee of this grant, and that is Mike Villeneuve, who has been a tower of strength, has always one of the most open people I know, and has a fantastic sense of humor, which also makes a huge difference, I must tell you, when you're discussing certain issues. Thank you very much, and we look forward to the next event.
Thank you very much, Bruce. I'll just step in quickly to thank everybody. If anyone who has a microphone can turn it on so we can hear you. I want to hear clapping. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So to Laurie, Annie, and Bruce, to Lindsay, Elizabeth, Alex, Valerie, and Judith, to Pam and Melanie, Alicia, Tina, Anna, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thanks to our translators. And thanks to all the participants who've stayed on for so long and participated so enthusiastically. I hope you'll join us for future events. The next one is on the kind of articulation between compassionate care and artificial intelligence and some lessons from COVID, led by Dr. Richard Booth at Western. And then on the 24th of November is our first National Summit on Racism in Nursing and Healthcare, featuring Sandy Hudson, who founded Black Lives Matter in Canada, and the Honorable Maurice Sinclair, who was the lead of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And we're going to have a really good 4 hours with lots of conversation in there. So I hope you'll join us. Let me say thank you, merci, miigwech, maraming salamat, toda raba, shukran, muito obrigado. Have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful evening, afternoon, day. And I'll ask my team to stay on, but the participants, you're set free. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Laurie, can you stay on for a few minutes, and Bruce and the team?
Alex.
Thanks, Alex. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Nice meeting you.
Thank you.
Thank you to the translators.
One day.
We're just going to wait for the participants to sign off, and because everyone can still hear and see us. That was great, eh? What a lovely afternoon. Well, afternoon here.
Mike, it was